150 million years ago, the world was a younger, more turbulent planet. It was a time of terrifying prehistoric creatures, a time when dinosaurs ruled supreme. They were the lords of the earth. Today, children of all ages gaze and wonder at these magnificent giants. But the pioneers who discovered the first dinosaurs just 150 years ago had only a few clues to their existence. In fact, just one clue, a tooth, was to open a trail to a world no one even knew existed. Finding the world of the dinosaurs isn't easy. They roamed across every continent, but their remains, fossil bones, ended up in the remotest corners of Africa, China, Europe, and America. But dinosaur hunters, paleontologists they're called, thrill to this challenge. The excitement of a new discovery brings out the detective in all of them. Some dinosaur experts have a sixth sense. They seem to smell dinosaur bones buried in the rock.
There's something about seeing bones for the first time when you know you're the only human being that's ever seen them. It's something very special about that. And that's what I wanted to do. It's very satisfying to be able to go out and be like a detective, actually collect pieces of information and put them together and make a story.
Ken, how did you get into paleontology?
Well, I owe that to my mother, or else maybe I should blame my mother. When I was 5 years old, she took me to see the movie Godzilla. And there I saw essentially maybe not a real dinosaur, but it was pretty close to a dinosaur. And I was just so enthralled with this huge animal that was stomping around Tokyo. And I thought, dinosaurs. That's what I want to study.
You know, the history of life is this great mystery. And we're kind of like detectives, that we're given these clues. These clues are, a piece of bone, like this, or little fragments of bone. And we have the rocks that those bones are in. And from that, we have to piece together what the animals looked like. We also have to figure out what were the environments, what was the world that they lived in. And that's the excitement, to be on the trail of those discoveries, to be able to piece together that whole from these little parts. I mean, that's what's the thrill to me.
Though the clues have been buried for millions of years, we've only really discovered dinosaurs quite recently. To understand the clues, today's scholars still go back to 19th century England. Okay, Bob, now you come in from the field with your specimens. Mm-hmm. What's the next step? All you got is a bunch of little things there.
Well, this is some of the haul from this last year. Dinosaur teeth, meat-eating dinosaur teeth. And the next step is to go to the documents, what other people have thought about this type of tooth. And this may surprise you. I don't go to the literature of 1990 or 1980 or 1970. I found the most exciting thing. Let's go back to the original scholars. Go back to the last century, go all the way back to 1820s, because I find their level of analysis just incredibly acute.
Back in the middle of the 19th century, the science of paleontology, the study of old bones and ancient creatures, was just being invented. A few pioneer anatomists and dedicated amateurs began finding a few teeth here, a couple of bones there, that they recognized as clues to the existence of a world far older than anyone had imagined. One man, William Buckland, was the first dinosaur detective. He had just one clue, a gigantic tooth which he acquired in 1817. To what sort of animal did such an enormous tooth belong? No such creature or teeth that size exist today. Buckland had a tooth, but nothing else, nothing to compare it with. These fellows back there in the early part of the last century had nothing to go on. Nobody knew that there were any such animals that ever existed on Earth.
Right.
They find a little thing like that. Is that what he started with? Something like that? And he says from that he builds A model of a dinosaur?
He
Come
does.
on now,
He
wait a
does. And the way he did it is elegant. It's beautiful.
That's got to be one of the great detective stories
It
of all
is.
time.
And he had 2 lines of detective work, and there's the same 2 lines we had today. He had the line of, what animal today has teeth most like this one? And Buckland had there in the collection of the Royal College of Surgeons, jaws of lizards, meat-eating lizards, like this. This is one from India. I've been bitten by this species. Really gives you a nasty wound. So Buckland said, this jaw is a gigantic version of this type of jaw. And he's right, there is a distant affinity in evolution between lizards and dinosaurs, and mechanically they're quite similar.
Buckland deduced from its shape that the tooth must belong to a giant lizard, similar but much bigger than anything on Earth today. His gigantic lizard's tooth had just one function: to kill.
And his argument, which is exactly right, is that this strong curvature on the leading edge and a concavity on the trailing edge allows the weapon to cut across its prey, just as a cavalryman strikes down with the curved tip, getting a long wound. You can look
Now,
at
what did that tell him?
It told him that this animal killed, not like a lion or a tiger, by biting once in the throat or behind the neck. This animal killed like a giant lizard would kill, making long cuts in the body of its prey, long jagged cuts, and the prey would be weakened by loss of blood and trauma.
Buckland's genius was to imagine the tooth in the jaws of a full-size prehistoric reptile. With just one clue, he could deduce that this monster killer was 40 feet long and had the bulk of an elephant, and he was surprisingly accurate. For Buckland, a teacher at Oxford University, the tooth raised more questions than it answered. Where did the animal fit into the scheme of God's creation? What sort of animal was it? With a 19th century passion for order, Buckland concluded that the tooth, so like a lizard, must have belonged to a huge reptile. He named it, as we still do of all new dinosaur finds today, from the Greek. He called it Megalosaurus, giant reptile. But Buckland was also a man of God. The church insisted that the earth was thousands of years old. Buckland's Megalosaurus tooth was definitely millions of years old. At the time of the biblical flood, 2 of every species were saved. Nothing God had created could die out. But if his megalosaur had existed, why wasn't it on the ark? While the choir rejoiced, the early dinosaur detectives viewed Genesis as a guide, not a literal timetable of life on Earth. The Bible says that that Earth, the heavens, the creatures on Earth were created 4,000 years ago. How in the world did they reconcile that? Wasn't there a lot of turmoil in their community?
There wasn't. It was a surprise. It is true that the Anglican Church has produced more great paleontologists than any other organized religion. But they weren't vulgar creationists. They didn't believe the world was created 4004 BC. Not these men. They believed the Bible was a powerful document, spiritually correct. But they believed the story of Genesis allowed enormous room for the mind of man to understand God's law, natural law. And they fully believed natural law operated for a long time to give us these creatures. And they also saw God's hand in the sequence of fossils. Here were dinosaurs, animals that combine features of rhinos and lizards and crocodiles and even a bit of bird thrown in. And before them were amphibians, frog-like salamander animals. And after the dinosaurs came the brightest and best, the highest class, our class, the class Mammalia. So they saw a progression, an increase in the perfection of organic creation.
Today, most of us have no problem reconciling science and religion. Nearly everyone accepts that our planet is millions of years old. But while we can comprehend hundreds, even thousands of years, and marvel at ancient civilizations, I, for one, have great difficulty, even as did our early dinosaur detectives, in imagining the concept of life over millions of years. How can we understand the reign of the dinosaurs 200 million years ago? Well, perhaps I can use, in this great modern city of New York, the giant World Trade Center to give us some perspective on that vast expanse of time. Here at the base, the Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. The first organisms emerged at 3 billion years. Worms and fish appeared 500 million years ago, and these were followed by the ancestors of mammals and reptiles 250 million years later. The dinosaurs appeared 210 million years ago, and they ruled for 150 million years. And then, some 65 million years ago, they vanished. Just 3 million years ago, we humans appeared. Our chapter is the shortest in the history of life, barely visible at the top. A year after Buckland named his tooth, a second vital clue was made public. A young country doctor, so the story goes, was making a house call. His wife came with him. While Dr. Gideon Mantell attended his patient, his wife Mary stumbled upon a second gigantic tooth. But this tooth, unlike Buckland's, was not the tooth of a killer, but that of an enormous plant eater.
A tooth like this was found first by Gideon Mantell's wife, the first clue of a giant plant-eating dinosaur. Now, what Mantell did, he looked at the tooth. It was lizard-like in form, but it had this grinding surface. Here was an extinct animal that ground its food like an ox, he said. These weren't merely giant lizards. They were doing something that no lizard does today. They're grinding their food, which implies a much higher level of metabolism, much higher lifestyle.
Buckland had found the saber-like tooth of a monstrous killer. Mantell's tooth, an entirely different shape, was clearly the tooth of a giant plant eater. Like Buckland, he had no idea what animal it was. Its long snout boasted 200 chisel-edged teeth, packed closely together to form a unique grinding surface, capable of reducing the toughest leaves and twigs to a pulp. At 33 feet long and 2 tons in weight, it browsed the woodlands like a giant antelope. The Mantells searched further. Obsessed by their find, Mantell and his wife, like all good detectives, looked for more clues. Their patience was soon rewarded.
And it was Mantell's genius that he could take small fragments, and he had bits of heads and bits of feet and whatnot, and give a sculptor the idea of a gigantic 4 or 5 ton animal that combined the features of a lizard with an elephant, with a rhinoceros, with a bird. It was a chimera. It was a wonderful mix-up series of characteristics.
The way Mantell did that was brilliantly simple. He looked for a living equivalent. What animal had a tooth similar to this find? The plant-eating iguana had, on a smaller scale, teeth the same shape as his huge reptile. Mantell, with a few teeth and bones to go on, and the iguana as a guide, gave the world its first picture of a dinosaur. Getting the bones to fit this living model was not easy. He named it Iguanodon, iguana tooth. This was no ordinary lizard. There had to be more to the story.
Buckland and Mantell concentrated on the teeth. That gave them a clue to these animals being giant fossil reptiles. What they hadn't really recognized was that in addition to the teeth were other bones, and the bones had some very distinctive characteristics. And what it took was somebody else to look at these specimens with fresh eyes. And that person was Richard Owen.
In 1841, Britain's leading scientist, Professor Richard Owen, put both monster teeth on the map. With a pinch of cunning and an eye to personal publicity, Owen, observing the anatomy of the large mammals of our day, concluded that the fossil teeth must have belonged to a whole group of giants, now extinct.
Richard Owen was a very competent comparative anatomist, very eminent in his field, and he reviewed all the fossil reptiles known in Britain at the time. And he said, yes, these are clearly giant fossil reptiles, but there's something very special about them. And that special thing is that they can walk around with their legs held directly beneath the body, not sprawled to the side, as in a typical reptile. They're in fact much more like elephants and rhinoceroses living today. And he saw them as the zenith of reptilian evolution.
At a scientific meeting in Plymouth, he named them dinosaurs, the terrible lizards.
That brought with it a certain amount of acclaim, but there was a problem there because he was describing a concept. He could explain the teeth, he could explain the bones very clearly, but there wasn't a tangible, complete dinosaur to show off these creatures.
Owen hired the leading sculptor of the day, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, to bring dinosaurs to life. From the fragmentary evidence, Hawkins built models that thrilled Victorian England. They were destined for Crystal Palace in London. It was the first dinosaur theme park ever built, and it still attracts the public today. Ever the publicist, Owen celebrated the achievement by hosting the most bizarre dinner party ever held. On New Year's Eve, 1854, he invited the leading scientists of the day to wine and dine in the belly of Hawkins' still unfinished model of Iguanodon. Through an alcoholic haze, the world's most eminent scholars could now picture prehistory in all its terrifying glory. You might think that Central Park in the heart of New York City doesn't have much to do with dinosaurs. Well, you'd be wrong. The great British sculptor Waterhouse Hawkins, having modeled dinosaurs in England, was commissioned to come to America to build a dinosaur exhibition in Central Park. But it was not to be. Politics got in the way.
Well, on the basis of his success with the giant monsters in the Crystal Palace, he thought that he might try something of the same sort in the United States, where dinosaurs were beginning to come out of the ground. So he made arrangements to set up a museum in Central Park, which he titled the Paleozoic Museum, somewhat patterned after the Crystal Palace, that is with a big arch of glassware like an aviary, and an island in the middle with life-sized reconstructions of the animals in all their glory. Waterhouse Hawkins didn't understand New York politics. Politics in New York was then run by the Tammany Gang. William Marcy Tweed, an old fire chief who had become head of the Democratic organization, was the chief boodler, controlled the mayor, controlled the heads of departments, and so forth. Anything that happened in New York that didn't pay off for them was not going to be successful. Hawkins just failed to cross the right palms with silver. There was no profit in it for the politicians, and so they decided, this has got to stop. We can't make any money on it. And so they put the kibosh on the whole operation.
New York City boss William Tweed, through a mix of jealousy and town hall corruption, in 1871 ordered his henchmen to smash Hawkins' models with sledgehammers and to bury the pieces. To this day, they've never been found. But who knows? Hawkins' dinosaurs may be buried right here under my feet. Teeth formed the foundation for the early interpretation of dinosaurs, brought to life by sculptors like Waterhouse Hawkins in plaster and concrete. Today, more modern materials are used. Jim Gary is a sculptor who builds 20th century dinosaurs from junk which he finds in the scrapyards of America's automobiles. He adds his own interpretation to what dinosaurs ought to look like.
Wow, this is a good find. This is a '68 Cadillac. Right here we have the legs for Allosaurus, the arms, and also the head. Cut a couple of holes in here for eyes and nose, and you have a perfect head. This is a '74 Chevy. It's one of the parts that I use to make up the lower parts of my dinosaurs. This is one of the better cars to use for building dinosaurs if you're in the dinosaur business. Basically all the bigger cars and the earlier cars in the 50s and 60s make the best dinosaurs. When I first started out, they used to laugh at me, but in '78, I got to cover National Geographic, and from that point on, I was on the road. Yeah, I just finished up a show at the Smithsonian. Now I'm headed up to Rochester Museum, and then just on from there. I love working with the old parts because I can interpret them and make people think they're really looking at old bones instead of just old car parts. These are my interpretations. You can't count the vertebrae, which I've had paleontologists start to do, count the vertebrae, and I'm saying, hey, this is just my interpretation of what I think they look like. And I have a lot of fun with that because the paleontologists have to be so exact. And here I can add an extra rib or whatever it is at my whim, so it's a lot of fun.
But dinosaur detectives don't have that artistic license. From the early teeth, exhibitions like the Natural History Museum in London have built world-famous collections. Sculptors and cinema animators Use it as a reference library when building today's models. Ray Harryhausen created the monster in 1 million years BC. His Allosaurus, cousin of the infamous T-Rex, terrified Raquel Welch with its teeth. It was, of course, cinematic license, but like the dinosaur hunters of a century ago, the model makers are sure at least of one thing, that the teeth are right.
Let's have a look at it. That's
most
incredible.
interesting. There's the jaw, lower
Beautiful.
jawbone there, and
There's a
if
tactile.
you can fit that there. Look at
There
the
we go.
gap. My goodness, I don't see how they could pick up a person. But this is a small dinosaur. This is a, shall we say, a juvenile.
That's right.
There's
Seeing
a-
bones like this, I'm sure you agree, really makes you want to flesh up on them and bring them back to life.
But how do you do that from old bones? This Brachiosaurus is a gigantic dinosaurian giraffe. It came here to Berlin from an African expedition in 1911. At 35 feet high, 75 feet long, and weighing 30 tons, it is the biggest complete skeleton in the world. It's hard to imagine it fleshed up.
There are key areas where you can actually manage to put in muscles with a fair degree of certainty, particularly in the legs, both front and hind in this case, and around the girdles where the legs are supported. The reason for this is that there are very powerful muscles that run down along the sides of the leg bones, which actually allow movement to take place. Where they're attached to the bone surface themselves, they leave scars. And these scars are really quite distinctive. They leave a sculptured surface on the bone. For example, if you look at the top of the upper leg bone at the front of this animal, find a very large prominent bone. And that is where the muscles that ran across the center of the chest are found. If you add these all together, what you can do is very easily and fairly clearly put together the muscles that supported the limb in the front and also in the hind limb. And in that way, you can build up a fairly accurate picture of the way in which the muscles actually fitted together on any sort of prehistoric animal.
Hard on the heels of the dinosaur detectives have come artists and model makers. Everyone wants realistic dinosaurs now. Alice is the pet name for the juvenile Allosaurus, a 25-foot lithe predator from the middle age of the dinosaur empire. She is a cousin of Megalosaurus. Her creator, Robbie Braun, spent a year making her. She's the latest full-size, all-moving dinosaur, and she's bound for an American museum.
It's almost like going back in time in your mind, but it's also a bit of being a detective. You compile the research based on scientific evidence, and you splice it all together, and hopefully at the end of the day you come out with something that people are in awe of.
And everything were, oh my God. Yeah.
It's a bit awkward.
Does it drool? Will it drool?
Eventually we're going to try to get some glycerin. It brings you closer to a wide variety of very beautiful beasts that once roamed the world. There's only one way you can do that. It's either through film or in real life. And museums, I think, should be about real life, things that you can touch, things that you can see that move. Here we have a series of valves.
For Ray Harryhausen, old-time Hollywood model maker, the world of moving dinosaurs has changed. Not only what they look like, but the just as impressive wizardry inside.
That makes the mouth open. That's marvelous.
Despite America's latest high-tech models, dinosaur detectives still learn from teeth. One of the earliest and distant ancestors of Allosaurus was Coelophysis. At 10 feet long with razor-sharp serrated teeth, it was the first fast, lean meat-eater. With sharp eyes, the slender legs of a sprinter, and a long tail for balance, Coelophysis ate anything that moved. In hard times, it even ate its own young.
It walked much like a bird, and that's what we seem to see here. So I'm assuming that the other one, the bigger one, was a male, and this size then would be the adult female size. So it comes across here with a good brisk step. Again, one track right dead in front of the other. The hip structure was quite advanced, nothing sprawling or ungainly about the animal.
In the mud of an ancient lakeside, Coelophysis, hunting in packs, left near-perfect footprints. The lake, now a quarry in Virginia, is one of the biggest sites of Coelophysis tracks ever found. Bob Weems is interpreting the evidence.
At this point, the thing may well have been doing somewhere between 15 or 20 miles an hour.
Now, how do you know that?
There is actually a formula that's been worked out to determine the speeds of dinosaurs. A fellow by the name of Alexander in Britain has worked it out. And what you need to know is the height of the hips and the spacing between the footprints, and by cranking this into a rather complicated formula, you can come up with a pretty good estimate of the speed of the animal. It's possible these things may have been coming through in some kind of a hunting formation, if you will, spread out over a long distance like maybe lions or wolves.
This is the footprint of a small meat-eating dinosaur called Coelophysis that lived 200 million years ago. Remarkable, but not nearly as remarkable as the fact that footprints just like this have been found 2,000 miles away across the Atlantic Ocean in Britain. How in the world, you might ask, could that be? How could a land animal, even a dinosaur, cross such a vast ocean? Of course, it didn't. The answer is locked in geological time when the Earth was a great deal younger. Across the Atlantic in Britain, dinosaur hunters are working on identical clues to the ones found in the quarry site in Virginia. Taken together, the clues from both countries reveal a picture of the physical world that dinosaurs lived in, far different from our own. Mike Bassett and his team are recording the evidence for the Museum of Wales before erosion washes it away.
They're all much the same size. Yeah. I mean, here's that trackway. Look, he's turning away, look, isn't he?
And he crosses another one coming the other way then.
The most important thing to remember in making reconstructions of this kind is that the continents as we know them today simply didn't exist. Southern Britain and North America were joined together as part of the supercontinent of Pangaea. There was no Atlantic Ocean at all.
200 million years ago, when the early dinosaurs roamed, the Earth was very different from today. No continents, just one land mass surrounded by water. Coelophysis wandered the land, but as it did so, imperceptible changes were taking place. The land mass was beginning to break up, but very slowly, just an inch or so each year, spreading dinosaurs onto every continent of today's world.
It wasn't exactly a stroll, it was still a few 100 kilometers minimum, a few thousand kilometers. The main thing to remember, there was no ocean in between. It was a continuous landmass. And because it was land, animals like the dinosaurs and all the other animals living on that continent were capable of wandering freely across the continental mass.
With its vicious teeth, Coelophysis hunted its prey across the land mass of its world. The fossil evidence that made the dinosaurs the most successful animals ever is only now coming to light.
Immediately after making that footprint, of course, the dinosaurs moved on. Eventually, those areas of wet mud dried up in the intense heat of the sun in the deserts that existed at that time. They dried up and the mud was baked hard, and the footprints themselves were therefore baked hard. And eventually, more mud was washed across the desert and covered those footprints. And they were trapped in all time. Now, if we look across here, we can actually stand right on the edge of one of the watering holes where Coelophysis came down to drink, perhaps every evening. We use structures like this in the rocks to interpret the environments that existed here across southern Britain about 210 million years ago. And this surface particularly tells us that we were standing right on the edge of the freshwater lake where Coelophysis came for his drink. We have these beautiful structures called ripple marks, and these were formed when the water at the edge of the lake just washed forward very gently and backwards again very gently to form this little symmetrical mound in the sand called a ripple. And it's these kinds of structures that we use in the rock record to interpret the environments that the dinosaurs lived in all that time ago. It was very hot to start with. Coelophysis and its relatives lived in the low hills just to the north of here, probably where there was vegetation and probably therefore where it was slightly cooler. But the big problem he had, I would think, was that there was very little water around. And so he came down onto the hot desert flats when there were flash floods that flooded the lakes and flooded the streams, and he was able to use these environments to water.
Well, of course, especially towards evening time, like now or a little later, when the shadows get long, you almost sort of expect one of them to come tromping by you in the dark. It's just a flat open expanse like now. And with the tracks sitting here looking almost like they were made last week, you really get the feeling that they might just come right back by. It's almost amazing that they don't.
We now have a mass of evidence about Coelophysis and how it lived.
And then once it got here, it kind of swung over towards the right.
Dinosaur detectives have identified over 1,000 different species. At any one time, hundreds of thousands of dinosaurs would have existed together. But the early pioneers had few clues to the enormous variety that made up the kingdom of the dinosaurs. Then in 1878, in the sleepy Belgian town of Bernissart, miners working deep underground thought they had struck gold. Alas for them, they had found fool's gold, part of the disintegrating remains of fossil bones, worthless to them, but a veritable treasure trove to the dinosaur detectives. There were teeth, hands, heads, feet, broken limbs, and whole skeletons. Here in Belgium, for the first time, the bony remains of a whole herd of 39 complete skeletons of iguanodon. On every jaw was a wide set of teeth. Each one was identical to the teeth Dr. Mantell had found in England 60 years earlier. To Louis Dollo, an engineer, fell the task of reconstructing the complete animals.
And so, after 50 years of struggling with incomplete specimens, at last, Dollo had this one opportunity, a virtual Aladdin's cave of dinosaurs discovered in this little village at Bernissart. On the basis of all this wonderful material, he was able, for the first time, to reconstruct complete dinosaurs. Dollo was an obsessive man. He had a very narrow focus on dinosaurs. He wasn't just interested in the shapes of the bones. He was interested more in the way these were actually put together to make a real living, breathing animal. The methods that had been established by his forebear was that you needed a comparison. You needed something like it living today.
Dollo looked to birds, not lizards or big mammals, for a modern comparison. He chose the emu, with its upright posture and three-toed foot, as his blueprint for reconstruction.
It's not surprising, therefore, to find in the old archive photographs and paintings that the little models that lay beside the skeletons as Dollo began to reconstruct this animal were of an emu and a wallaby. And sure enough, that is exactly what these dinosaurs tend to look like.
Simply preparing such a massive find took 10 men 12 years.
It required a huge laboratory, and so Dollo had a big team of workers and conservators actually involved in the simple chipping out of these specimens. Dollo did two very important things when he was reconstructing these dinosaurs. First of all, he had complete skeletons, which allowed him to do classic dinosaur restorations using armatures to actually produce a mounted skeleton, which provided the first visual image of dinosaurs. The other thing which he did, which was really quite unique, was to actually use some of the skeletons collected in Renaissance and reconstruct them as they would have appeared in death. Instead of just considering isolated bones as being of interest, he says, what are those bones for? He was not only interested in the ancient remains, but he was interested in this branch that would allow us to look at the shape and structure of bones and interpret those in the way that we look at living animals. He really tried, in the best way that he could, to bring these animals truly back to life.
In 1990, the most complete skeleton of the king of dinosaurs was uncovered in America at a dig in Montana. Researchers took weeks to dig out and prepare for travel to the lab the bones of the fiercest dinosaur of all time, Tyrannosaurus rex.
The animal died in a stream bed, and the lower jaw had separated from the skull up there.
How large was the whole animal?
We're guesstimating right now that it was probably about 40 feet. We're missing portions of the tail, but everything else seems to be here. Well, what we want to do is take a look at the animal. Well, by looking at the teeth, we have a good idea of what it did for a living. It ate meat.
Weighing in at 3.5 tons and armed with 6-inch teeth, T-Rex always has been seen as too big and slow for the chase, only driven by hunger to go in search of rotting carcasses. Now dinosaur detectives in Montana have new clues, the first ever complete arms of T-Rex, which reveal they were not as tiny and useless as we first thought. Today we see him as a lurking predator waiting to ambush his victim.
We have the upper arm here. We have the two lower arms, which correspond to these bones here, and then we have a hand. And it did confirm, in fact, that Tyrannosaurus rex did have the two fingers. If we then move the finger bones through their arc of motion, what we discover is that the thumb claw could then embed deep into the body of the prey, so that if the prey is struggling, then the prey will essentially impale itself deeper on the claw and would not be able to pull itself free.
Matt, I understand that in reconstructing a model of this, you determined that there was a lot more strength in these things than had ever been believed before.
We estimated that it could hold about 426 pounds.
Oh,
Right.
Okay. How much can a weightlifter, an Arnold Schwarzenegger, hold, do you suppose?
Well, I'm not sure, but with this arm here, we did the same methods, and we came out with about 41 pounds.
We believe that Tyrannosaurus then would grab its prey and latch onto it with the claws digging into the body of the prey, and the prey would be struggling, but it couldn't get away. The thumb claw would essentially dig deeper as the animal preyed. And with that big head up there, essentially with the prey very close to the body, it was very easy for the head to come down and essentially to bite down to kill its prey. And with those big muscles on top of the neck, then it could probably rip and essentially kill its prey in that fashion.
You're making Tyrannosaurus Rex sound like a pretty mean beast.
He was definitely the king of the beasts.
From only 8 skeletons ever found, we now know that T. rex was an intelligent, finely balanced animal with powerful hind legs, acute vision, and a voracious appetite. His jaws were lined with teeth which were long, sharp, and curved. They are the largest teeth of any meat eater that has ever lived. Teeth very similar to those of Tyrannosaurus were those described by William Buckland, who began our detective story, and in one sense at least, brings our story full circle, for T. rex lived right at the close of the reign of the dinosaurs. So, Paul, that's how dinosaurs were discovered. A few brave and clever men overturned our view of our world. It's older and far richer in creatures long vanished than we'd ever imagined. They found the skeletons, all right, but skeletons, you know, don't really tell us very much about flesh and muscle and skin and color, do they? What do these things really look like? Well, our dinosaur detectives are going to tell us next time. Here in America, in 1877, the frontier was moving west. Gold fever had gripped the country, and not so well known, so had dinosaur fever. Here in Wyoming and in neighboring Colorado, dinosaur bones were being found by the ton. And partner, there was money in them there bones. The discoveries ignited one of the bitterest, nastiest, orneriest feuds in the history of dinosaur excavation. Opening up the West for gold prospectors and dinosaur hunters posed a problem for anyone seeking fame and fortune. The West was still Indian territory. While General Custer fought and died at the Little Bighorn, dinosaur hunters were at work, even as the battle raged near them. They crept around the perimeter of the battle to dig out the dinosaur remains before a rival could arrive on the scene. Hard on the heels of the early dinosaur hunters came railway workers. They too found giant bones in their thousands as the iron horse cut through the rocky terrain of the Midwest. Here at Como Bluff in Wyoming, paleontologists, or dinosaur detectives, still search for dinosaur bones. Each new find reveals more clues about dinosaurs and their lifestyle. Bob Backer, a modern dinosaur detective, has retraced the steps of the early pioneers. He's driven by that same spirit and thirst for knowledge that was born 100 years ago.
I think the secret is the spirit of the times. When the railroad was coming through here and the survey men were coming through, there was the sense of this as the frontier, not just a political or an economic frontier, but this was a scientific frontier.
How did these old railroad men know that they were finding dinosaur bones, for heaven's sakes?
You know, they didn't. When they first found the giant bones here at Como, they thought the rocks were much younger than they really were. They thought they were in the age of mammals. And so they sent a telegram back to New Haven, to Yale, and they said, we have these giant bones, and we think they're for this huge giant ground sloth.
Two East Coast professors, Edward Drinker Cope and O.C. Marsh, both recognized the finds for what they were. The huge dinosaur bones dwarfed anything yet found. Both men had a passion for dinosaurs. Both were rich men who could pay handsomely to acquire them. They had started out as friends, but by the time of the dinosaur bonanza, both were bitter rivals. Each man used his money and driving ambition to outwit the other. It was just a feud until 1877, when Marsh acquired a staggering 30 tons of dinosaur. The bone wars had begun.
They let their discovery be known back east. Was there a rivalry and you say a gold rush?
Incredible one.
Was it really coming
Incredible
out
one. The two men, Professor Cope in Philadelphia, Professor Marsh in New Haven, both wanted the bones from here. Marsh got here first, and his men worked up and down Como Bluff and got, as I said, the easy bone, but they got a lot of good easy bone.
For both Cope and Marsh, it was a fight to the finish. Neither was willing to see good specimens fall into the hands of the other. They would rather destroy finds than see their rival get them. Stories still have it that each man ordered his henchmen to steal the finds of his rival, and what they could not steal, they smashed.
Cope hired two men to rustle a dinosaur, the Hubble brothers. They came over the cliff. When Marsh's men were at that end, Cope's rustlers came over that end. They got one dinosaur, but a good one. It's the big meat eater mounted in New York, the Allosaurus.
But was anybody killed in these dinosaur wars?
No, I don't think any shots were fired in earnest, except in print.
Yeah.
If people could be sued for scientific libel, it would have happened.
By the end of the bone wars, Cope and Marsh had between them collected and named over 120 new species of dinosaur. At Como Bluff, small plant eaters like Dryosaurus and Leosaurus. Bigger ones like the plated Stegosaurus. And the giants Diplodocus and Apatosaurus. Then there were the meat eaters, Ceratosaurus and the giant Allosaurus, for whom no plant eater, however large, was safe. American dinosaurs were on the map. The dinosaur bonanza, fueled by Cope and Marsh, lasted for 12 frantic years and was made all the more intense because of the rarity of complete skeletons. Even today, the chances of a major skeleton being discovered are still slim. For a dinosaur to survive for millions of years requires a great slice of luck. As a geologist, Christine Turner understands those odds very well. For our benefit, she pretends to be a dinosaur and explains how it died, was buried, and finally resurfaced as a fossil today.
I used to be a dinosaur that roamed around the margins of the stream. But maybe I died by trying to cross the river. Maybe I died by a predator. Perhaps I died during a drought. But whatever happened, I got disarticulated. My bones fell apart, and I'm now a femur bone. Okay, now I'm a dinosaur bone. I was beached on this sandbar during a violent storm that carried the bone in a flash flood down the river and washed me up on the beach, and I landed up on the sandbar. Now with time, as the water receded and waned, the sand would just deposit right on top of me and bury me. After that, additional layers were deposited on top of me. And so I was eventually 8,000 feet below the surface. How did I get exhumed at the surface? Well, following all of this deposition, there was a period of uplift and mountain building. And as the river cut through the mountain and created the canyon, it cut through the same layer that the dinosaur bone was in and exposed that bone.
Dinosaur remains in just a few places still reveal a treasure trove. Some are so full of bones they've been left in place and had their own museum built around them.
Behind me we see the surface of a 150-million-year-old sandbar, originally horizontal and now tilted up and dipping to the south. And strewn across the face of that sandbar are the remains of approximately 10 to 12 different species of dinosaurs. The most common dinosaurs here are brontosaurs, very large, long-necked, long-tailed herbivores. But there are two carnivorous dinosaurs known, the large meat-eater Allosaurus and the slightly smaller meat-eater Ceratosaurus.
These deposits, rich as they are only a glimpse into the long reign of the dinosaurs. Over a changing calendar, 150 million years long, species came and went. Reading the record is not easy for modern-day dinosaur hunters.
Well, how does each of the dinosaurs found here fit into the general worldwide picture?
That's a really neat question, and we got a graphic that'll illustrate that. Now, the way I look at it, the whole history of dinosaurs is like taking a movie through time. In a place like Como Bluff, you have layer after layer after layer, each with its own dinosaurs. It's like getting a burst of frames of motion picture of how the dinosaurs came, flourished, went extinct. Any one place in the world, you don't have the whole history of dinosaurs. In fact, you don't even have the whole history of one family of dinosaurs. You just have a little intense burst of documents and fossils.
How many millions of years are represented from the bottom there to the top of this thing?
Yeah, tough question. We don't yet have radioactive beds that can give us a nice hard number. But by comparing the fossils we get at the bottom of the section and the top, it's about 10 million years from where we're sitting to those black beds. So all of this history of flourishing and extinction and turnover is played out over roughly, that'd be about 2 million dinosaur generations, 10 million chronological years.
Do you have in your mind's eye what it looked like around here at that time?
Before we started working here, the reconstruction was of a giant swamp, sort of like the Amazon basin or the Congo basin or a part of New Jersey I grew up in, just swamps and wet soil. But when we studied the fish, the only common fish were lungfish that could breathe air during the dry season. The turtles are all pretty small. If this were a giant swamp, there'd be huge turtles. And we found little lumps of rock, like that one, that were cemented with lime. And these lime lumps grow in the soil during the dry season. So now we know the classic picture is totally wrong. This wasn't a swamp. This was a giant, hot floodplain with a long dry season, maybe like Australia or Peninsula India today.
Today we know more about the world in which dinosaurs lived and the animals themselves. The giant plant-eater Diplodocus at 90 feet dwarfed the 30-foot predator Allosaurus. But the hunter would have to be cunning. One wrong move and the victim would live to see another day. Much of what we know about Diplodocus is the result of American philanthropy on the grand scale.
Not long after the bone wars were over, another American millionaire became fascinated by dinosaurs. Andrew Carnegie, who made a fortune out of steel, read a story in the New York Journal of 1898. The headline said, biggest dinosaur ever found. Andrew Carnegie wanted it. He wanted it for his museum in Pittsburgh. What Andrew Carnegie wanted, he usually got. He immediately dispatched a man with a check for $10,000 and the orders, buy it.
In 1895, Carnegie had made his fortune in railroads and steel, and he decided to give to Pittsburgh a palace of culture. And the palace had 4 columns. One was art, another was literature, another was music, and the 4th was science. And in 1898, science meant dinosaurs.
Carnegie's money bought him the best bone hunters of the day, but no amount of searching, it seemed, would unearth the skeleton he yearned for. 2 months later, his investment paid off. Carnegie's diggers struck lucky, very lucky.
What they found was this, a giant toe bone of a dinosaur sticking out of the rock. And they got very excited because when they started excavating the rock from around the toe bone, they found that the toe bones led to the ankle bones, and the ankle bones led to the shin bones of the dinosaur, and the shin bones led to the proverbial thigh bones of the dinosaur. It was the most perfect July 4th that any paleontologist has ever had, and Carnegie got exactly what he paid for, an 84-foot colossal dinosaur. It was named Star Spangled Dinosaur because it was found on July 4th, Independence Day. The dinosaur Diplodocus became not only the toast of Pittsburgh and the toast of North America, it became the toast of the world. It became so wildly popular. A tavern song was written in honor of Diplodocus, which only had one verse, at least one verse that has survived, that went something like, "The crowned heads of Europe all make a royal fuss over Uncle Andy and his old Diplodocus." Uncle Andy must have loved it. He paid for it, and he got everything he paid for and more. Casts of Diplodocus carnegii were made for and installed in Paris, in Vienna, in Bologna, in Berlin, in Leningrad, in La Plata, in Mexico City, and Buenos Aires. That really set the stage for the popularity of dinosaurs and of the great studies on dinosaurs. Here was tangible evidence to all the people of Europe of the terrific dinosaur finds that were occurring in North America.
The huge bones of the giant dinosaurs inspired not only the museums. At the turn of the century, the motion picture, the cinema, was just coming into its own. And a young animator named Winsor McKay produced one of the very first animated pictures. It was called Gertie the Dinosaur. For the first time, showed the public what dinosaurs really were, moving, living creatures. And they gazed at them in awe and amazement. Something I'm going to do right now.
Come on out, Gertie, and make a pretty bow. Gertie, down her jumbo. Gertie will now show that she isn't afraid of me and will take me for a ride. Alley up.
Audiences everywhere were spellbound by Gertie the Dinosaur. But that was soon eclipsed when in 1909, an even bigger giant came to light. A German expedition found in East Africa a dinosaur so big it could easily look over the top of a 4-story building. The skeleton was named Brachiosaurus. Brought back to Germany, it remains today the star of the Berlin Museum. The giant creature is a feat of mechanical engineering. Today, dinosaur detectives like David Norman still marvel at the size of the bones and how they were designed.
This was a real giant amongst dinosaurs. It was about 75 feet long. It probably weighed somewhere between 30 and 40 tons. And its head towered some 30 feet above the ground. It was a true giant. The foot has a rather remarkable design. It consists of these very long bones that are tied together. Instead of lying flat on the ground, as you expect in our feet, the bones are actually tied together vertically. And they're held together with bands of really powerful ligaments that ran from one to the other. On the end of this very tubular sort of foot are very short toes, very stubby toes, rather like that of an elephant. So what you've got here is a classically designed foot for bearing lots and lots of weight. And you need that sort of foot if you weigh 30 or 40 tons. You can see the way in which they supported their weight by looking back at the hind limb here. You have a beautiful vertical pillar, which is classically designed to bear an enormous amount of weight in these creatures. So all in all, for bearing their own weight, they have a fantastic design, which is ready-made for walking around on land. What about the neck? Because that really is spectacular. If you look at the simple design of the neck, then you've got beneath it a series of bony rods with muscles attached. So the best comparison that you can use for a neck of that type is really a crane, where the jib is formed by the skeleton itself, and then the hawsers are formed by the muscles and the tendons that actually operate the neck and move it from side to side or up and down in a very precise way. It's a very simple and rather elegant mechanical design. I mean, all in all, you've got a fantastic animal.
Brachiosaurus means arm lizard. It got its name because of the extraordinary length of its arms, up to 15 feet. These arms gave it a giraffe-like posture, ideal for reaching up into the trees where it would nip off vegetation using chisel-shaped teeth. Studies of the bone tell us that unlike modern reptiles, it grew fast, achieving its huge size in a few short years. Today, even bigger dinosaurs than the Berlin specimen are slowly being uncovered. The focus has shifted back to America. Here at the Dry Mesa Quarry in Colorado, the bones of the biggest dinosaurs ever are being found. Because of the sheer size of the bones, picks and shovels are no longer enough.
Well, that's something, Doug. Been interesting.
Yeah, you bet. You know, on this bulldozer, we're sitting on top probably of the biggest jigsaw puzzle in the world. This site in Colorado contains the bones of the biggest animals ever to roam the planet. But to get those bones out of this hard rock takes a combination of brute force and surgical precision. Ken, what's the process of getting bones out of this hard rock here?
First of all, we bring a dozer in and cut this overburden down, and we take it down as close as we dare to the top of the deposit. Well, we start with air tools. We have jackhammers, medium-sized jackhammers, small jackhammers, mainly just to move rock. But when we discover a bone, then we usually move to smaller tools like the awl and the hammer.
Those bones look like they've been varnished or lacquered or something.
They have. As we uncover them, we put shellac on them to help hold pieces in place and make the bone a little stronger until we can work around it and get it collected. These bones have been covered on top with the strips of burlap and plaster. They're now ready to cut loose and turn over so we can cover the underside. And then there'll be a completely wrapped package such as this one. This one's ready to be loaded on the truck and transported back to the university.
Dr. Wade Miller is the current director of the Earth Sciences Museum at Brigham Young University.
That's correct.
Doctor, how big did these things that are being found around here get to be?
The dinosaurs that are coming out of this quarry are, at least not all of them, but some of them larger than any that have been found elsewhere in the world. So that's why we're excited about this site. This one, which has been called Supersaurus, estimated maybe at a length of 120 to 130 feet, making it maybe 30-some feet larger than Diplodocus and proportionally larger all over. So it's a huge dinosaur. What we discovered with this one was that it was hollow inside. Now, that had never been found before. The opening would have been 2 or 3 times this in life. There are little pieces of bone that we found in there, and in other areas we found out that they were actually running vertically, showing that these were used as struts. That is, little pieces to support, much like corrugated cardboard, for the same reason, to have light weight and yet a maximum amount of strength. So again, in answer to your question, what the animal did was to have kind of an engineering marvel here of hollowing out the bone in areas that weren't known before.
So in other words, you can have fairly light bone structure and still have a heavy animal, as you
Right.
suggest, 50 tons or so. This is just another bit of evidence of the fact that paleontology is really a detective job.
It really is. It is. It's like
putting one clue to another and finally coming to a conclusion.
It is. It's exactly like being a detective. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, to be able to find these things and then predict other things and then find more evidence that either supports your prediction or does not, and then you go on to something else.
Jim Jensen has been doing exactly that. He thinks he's found a real winner, a whopper, even for dinosaurs.
That dig's not only fascinating, but the scenery is glorious down the valley.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Jim, how did you get involved in this whole thing of digging up dinosaur bones?
Well, it started when I was a small boy.
Maybe we can sit down over here.
Yeah, let's do.
After 60 years of searching, Dinosaur Jim's unconventional career has finally paid off.
My interest in fossils began when I was a little kid.
Jim is basically a self-tutored man. How in the world did you get recognition from the academic fraternity?
At Brigham Young University, I was curator of the geology department. But I wanted to establish a museum, but they wouldn't let me use the word museum. But I had stationery printed up anyway with the Earth Sciences Museum. I was curator of the Earth Sciences Museum, something that didn't exist. And after several years, I thought I might as well be director, so I promoted myself to director, had some new stationery printed up. Then I would conduct business with the director of the Natural History Museum in Paris. But then your fame doesn't come from sitting in the laboratory picking away at bone. It comes from what you find. In Montana, I found a big skull. I could barely reach the width of it, 6 feet wide and nearly 9 feet long. When I plastered it up, it weighed 1.5 tons, so it's out in the Badlands. So how do I get it out? Well, I worked as a longshoreman handling heavy things. I worked as a truck driver, and I knew how to stomp down fences, so there was no problem getting it out. I continued collecting material, and eventually amounted to a tremendous amount underneath the university stadium, and I consider that one of my triumphs, is to get some of the athletic department space to put my bones in.
Jim Jensen's big find really is a whopping great dinosaur. He calls it Ultrasaurus, the ultimate in big dinosaurs.
Not here, Walter. I'd like to show you something.
Oh, for heaven's sake. What's that?
Well, the New York Giants have never played in the stadium, but had they done so, this is something that might have been left behind.
I suspect you knew we were coming.
Yeah.
But seriously.
To assemble it upright, he needs the university's 60,000-seat stadium. So far, though, he's only found a leg and a shoulder blade. What the whole skeleton would do to the home team is anyone's guess.
What I can't figure out, Jim, is how you figured out what this model of a dinosaur leg should really look like.
This leg belongs to a dinosaur of a group that were plant eaters. They walked around on 4 legs, had a long neck, long tail, so we know the type of dinosaur it was.
So with that size, with the feet here on the 33-yard line, the tail would be back there somewhere around the 40-yard line of the opposition.
Though the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, you'd never know it at New York's biggest toy store. Here, dinosaurs are big business, generating millions of sales and enthralling kids of all ages. Candies, balloons, sweatshirts, you name it, somebody will stick a dinosaur on it.
He's killing it! Whoa!
Oh, you're gonna push him right off the cliff.
Whoa! And he's charging!
Oh, but he'll crush them all. He's too big, the T-Rex. That's the problem. That's why it was called a Rex.
No, but it's
the king of the all.
But it's 3 against 2.
You might think that you couldn't come up with anything new on dinosaurs. Well, one fellow did. He was a toy inventor, looking for something new for his own children's Christmas. So he asked them, and he came up with a moneymaker that has astounded the entire American toy industry.
In 1985, Jim Alley needed a winner. Toys were a cutthroat business. For him, gloom already had set in.
It was the day after Christmas, and my kids had just gotten all the robots they could ever stand. And I knew that I was looking for the next thing that would make kids really excited. And I thought, gee, what was the one theme that kids didn't have any toys to play with? And it came to me right away that my kids, and when I was a child, the same thing, everybody likes dinosaurs. And the kids really need something with dinosaur toys. And you just couldn't give a kid a couple of dinosaurs to play with. You had to give them a reason to play with the dinosaurs. So I came up with the idea of Dino Riders.
Great.
Now these guys are all in exact scale to the dinosaur. So this is like, these are like 5'10", and this is how big the dinosaur was, really big.
Really would be. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And all the dinosaurs are like, they're all in scale to each other then too.
Yes,
okay,
they are.
Great.
Mm-hmm. That's a
I hope the good guys
typical.
have a weapon that's as good as the bad guys. It got us into the international scene. It was a big thing for us in the United States. We developed a TV show that went on the air around Dino Riders. We were the first toy company to sell a video cassette to promote a product category. It made us a big-time company. Kids love Dino Riders. It's a concept that has been able to be interpreted around the world because every kid has that fantasy about dinosaurs and that they were real, but they're kind of mystical and they're kind of scary, but they were big and real and really, truly exciting.
You've come a long way to die, youngster.
Looking for someone? Short breath?
I'll be back, youngster.
Dino Riders are here.
I look back at that and say, gee, I wish I could have another day after Christmas like that.
Well, movie moguls, too, found a way to make money out of dinosaurs. Countless films from King Kong to Fantasia fired imaginations around the globe. Mostly, it was the aggressive flesh eaters that were used to terrify the audiences, frequently in pursuit of buxom young ladies. The fact that the dinosaurs disappeared from Earth 64 million years before we appeared wasn't allowed to get in the way of a good story.
I'd like you to meet the family. Here are 2 members.
Ray Harryhausen is the grand old man of special effects, especially dinosaurs.
Here's the Allosaurus and the pterodactyl that carried Miss Welsh away. You take the basis of a real Allosaurus and you glamorize it like you would a movie star, like the eyebrows to cast shadows and sort of a demonic-looking expression on its face. And you give it a good mouthful of teeth, of course. The way you animate it dictates whether he's a villain or a hero. When you see him on the screen, 40 feet high, with a little figure of a real person next to him, I think you'll find that you wouldn't like to stay around while he examines you as a morsel. Dinosaurs, by their very appearance, are dynamic creatures. You have to write the story around it to make use of them in the way that man sees them. We're not making a film for professors because they usually don't go to see these type of films. And we're making a film to entertain the public. So certain liberties are taken. But basically, the whole principle is to get them as accurate as possible.
Did you see that? If dinosaurs were so immense and so heavy, how in the world did they move around? Well, the dinosaur detectives are still finding out. The secret lies in their bones.
Huge, yes, but they were well-designed marvels of the animal kingdom. Despite its length of 90 feet, Diplodocus moved smoothly and efficiently over the ground. It swung its long, straight, pillar-like legs in an easy stride. The neck and tail, held by powerful tendons running the length of its spine, added poise to the body as it moved. The clues were confirmed when, in 1980, dinosaur detectives began looking again at another detective trail neglected for 30 years. In Colorado, huge footprints, dinosaur trackways, caught Martin Lockley's eye. At this spot, the footprints left on a muddy plain by a passing herd of huge dinosaurs were frozen in time. The mud baked hard in the sun and later turned to stone. And millions of years later, the footprints were exposed in the bed of a river. Lockley is convinced that the tracks provide clues to how the dinosaurs moved in life.
Well, what we have right all around us here are a series of Brontosaur trackways going parallel. These 5 animals were going in this direction as a group. These are the big back feet here, and these are the little front feet. And there's at least 5 animals about the same size, group of sub-adults that were moving together almost certainly as a herd. This is the very large back footprint of the Brontosaur, and this is the small, almost hoof-shaped front footprint. And as they walked along, here's the front footprint, foot goes down, and the big back foot comes up behind it and almost oversteps it, marks the back end of the front footprint. There's at least 2 different ways that a 4-footed animal can walk. One is that it can move its alternate feet, that's front left and back right here, like this, and then like this, and then like this, and then like this. Another way that they can walk is to move both feet on one side, like this. So they move like that, and like that, and like that, and like that, and so forth. Certainly, I think that the large animals like the hippo and the rhino and the elephant make fairly good comparison with large 4-footed dinosaurs like the Brontosaur or the Triceratops.
The wealth of new evidence dinosaur detectives have discovered about the movements of these huge beasts is eagerly sought by others. Professional sculptors and artists have done their own investigations. Recreating full-size dinosaurs has turned Dave Thomas into something of a sleuth.
Basically, the problem is that you can't actually see the animal you're sculpting. Well, the first thing you have to do is your research, study the animal, and the first thing I did on these big bipedal ones was basically by reading tracks and then by putting the skeleton into those tracks and trying to see how it moved there. The first thing I found was that the dinosaur balances here at the hip joint with the tail balancing the front part, but he also uses the tail to balance left and right, so that the tail, the long tail there, is a tremendous lever, balance lever, just like a wire walker's pole. I wanted to make it as far forward in the stride as I could. With the right foot down, of course, the tail is off on the left. And I was afraid that I had the tail too far over, in which case it would have fallen this way. But I trusted my instincts. We put all the pieces together, welded it, we picked it up with the crane and set it on its feet. The crane lines went slack and it stood, and I knew I'd gotten it right.
We don't find dinosaurs like this in the field. They don't come ready mounted. And so it becomes a problem sometimes to know how these things actually were put together. You can see the way he's menacing me, that he's interested in eating meat. He's got these big sharp teeth and they've got serrations on them. He's a meat eater. Now, meat eaters need to run after their dinner. He's got these nice long back legs, and the skeleton is balanced by virtue of that long tail. It's a racier looking animal. This is like a greyhound in comparison with an old cow. So if I was laying bets on this chap and this chap for acceleration, I'd give it to this guy every time. This one will be first away from the lights.
But for dinosaur detectives, working out just how fast the dinosaur moved is no game of chance. By piecing together the clues from the bones and tracks in Texas, Jim Farlow can calculate the speed of one particular dinosaur 130 million years ago.
Some of the most interesting information you can get from dinosaur trackways comes not from the individual footprints themselves, but from the spacing from one footprint to the next. One can estimate how fast a dinosaur was going from the length of the footprint as translated into the leg length and the length of the stride. Now, in a dinosaur that's walking, no particular hurry, just doing whatever dinosaurs do normally, the stride length is generally around 5 to 7 times the length of the individual footprints. In the case of the dinosaurs from the site in West Texas, where the stride length was 15 to 20 times the footprint length, one can estimate that they might have been running at speeds of as much as 25 miles per hour, which is pretty respectable by anybody's standards.
Jim Farlow believes that speeds like that have direct comparisons with the animals of today. The emu is a fast-running bird, and it leaves a footprint just like the tracks found in Texas.
Well, we're interested in animals like the emu here because the emu is the largest living flightless bird. It sometimes seems to me in some artists' reconstructions of dinosaurs, they almost make their faces too mammal-like. Whereas if you look at the face of a lizard or a crocodile or an emu, there's something alien about it, something very unmammal-like. And so when I look at this fellow's face, I just can't help but sort of see through the feathers and almost think that I'm looking in the face of a dinosaur. I expect they had that sort of, that harshness, that glassy look to them. It's hard to put into words exactly what I'm seeing, but I almost seem to feel that I've got an insight into the psychology of a dinosaur from looking at the face of a bird like this.
To imagine fast-moving dinosaurs, we need direct comparisons like that. While the dinosaur detectives provide the clues, artists who work with them use their visual imagination to flesh out dinosaurs in action.
We sit at a table, the whole set of people at the paleontology department, and discuss these animals and what we think they do and what Dale thinks and how he feels about that animal. And I've got to just get that feeling of what he pictures this creature to be.
We had to begin with the beginnings, but see, I had the understanding that Miss Kish used to work with living models, and most of them are human beings of one kind or another, and so we had to work from the bones back out again.
And I could put a pin in and feel where it is and say, is that as thick as you think it should be? And we work like this. And he eventually comes up with how he wants his position, and then I start sculpturing the bones in this particular position. And from that point on, it's how those muscles attach on the bones, from here to there, this to that, and how fat those muscles are, how strong it has to be to hold up that big head, etc.
3 years ago, the bones of Carnotaurus, meat-eating bull, because of its bull-like horns and predatory habit, were found in South America. At 36 feet long and 2 tons in weight, the excitement for artist Stephen Zirkus was that with it, they found perfectly preserved imprints of its skin. It was for Zirkus the find of a lifetime.
Here we have a very unique situation where instead of restoring an animal that we have no idea what it externally would look like, not only were the bones found, but the actual skin impressions were found in patches from throughout the entire body, from the skull all the way onto the tail. One of the most exciting discoveries with the skin is that we found portions of skin on the skull as well as on portions of the body. This is the first time that we've ever had any skin actually preserved, revealing what the face of a dinosaur might look like. The skin impressions of Carnotaurus on the face as well as the rest of the body, it indicates that Carnotaurus, like other dinosaurs, had reptilian skin, scaly. In other words, it did not sweat.
And it didn't take long for the mass of new evidence, so painstakingly built up by dinosaur detectives, to reach a more commercial market. Dinosaurs have been repackaged. In museums, bones are being fleshed out. These touring dinosaur exhibitions pull in big crowds and big profits for both the museums and their commercial partners.
It's changed dramatically, hasn't it? This idea came to me in about 1982, mid-82. We tried to convince the museum directors that this would be a good idea to have animated dinosaurs in their museums. And it took about 2 years to convince them that that was indeed the case. From that point on, then they really took off. The popularity was just enormous. We broke record crowds in just about every museum we've been into. Museums worldwide now have them. We're throughout Europe, Australia. We're going to the Far East, all over the United States and Canada, and they're attracting record crowds.
How difficult was it to animate these figures?
That was the first step, Walter, to make sure that I had the exact input on how these creatures looked. And from that point, then, it was a matter of getting electronic technicians on board, sculptors and artists, because the sculptors make these things come to life.
The sad thing in one respect, though, is that the amount of commercialization that can occur around the subject of dinosaurs is a bit like a double-edged sword. In some respects, the commercial aspects of it are exciting because they draw people in and create a lot of interest and excitement. But in another way, there's also always the danger that the interest, the real science, can be trivialized. That in the end, the theme park manager or the store manager won't be so interested in the science. He'll be more interested in the terrifying image that the customers want to see. So never mind the details, let's just create the image. And that would really sell science down the river. In these days, when funds are very tight and very restricted, especially in university and museum research, that we actually need more support, perhaps from the commercial side, in order to foster the sort of research, the new discoveries that are so vital to make the subject that I work in so vibrant and so healthy as it has been in the past.
Under this university football stadium lie 100 tons of dinosaur bones. They've been gathering dust since 1962. Starved of funds, dinosaur detectives can't unlock the secrets of bones dug up 30 years ago.
How serious is the restriction of funds today, and what's it costing us in lack of information we might be getting otherwise?
Well, paleontology, digging dinosaurs, is incredibly cheap science. It really is. You don't need $1.6 billion per brontosaur. And although it's pure science, it certainly brings enormous enjoyment to millions and millions of people. I can't think of many other topics other than dinosaurs that cut across every age and class boundary. People love to think about dinosaurs. There isn't enough funding for that type of science that it just does a lot of good for the human brain. It used to be private individuals that funded digs. Andrew Carnegie spend a couple $100,000 to get a wonderful Diplodocus out there about 6 miles on Sheep Creek. And Marsh's men and Cope's men came from private funds.
What is there out there still to learn that would hurt us not to know?
Well, my father used to ask me that question. He said, why do people pay money to support paleontology? And I thought a bit. My father's a musician. And I said, Dad, where do more people go in Washington, D.C.? The National Symphony, with its wonderful symphony, or the National Museum with its dinosaurs? And he thought and said, well, a lot more people go to see the dinosaurs. There's just something wonderful, exciting, beautiful about the history of life. To really appreciate where we are today, the animals and the plants, you got to know where they've come from. That long, complex history, evolution and extinction, dinosaurs, mammals, turtles. And that gives us a profound sense of where we belong.
America used its wealth and enthusiasm to put dinosaurs in center field for all the world to see. But the vision was of dull, lumbering creatures who did little but sleep and eat. And then out of China came the first fossilized dinosaur egg, and that led to a revolution. The idea that dinosaurs might have lived in family groups. And then more eggs were discovered, and the possibility that dinosaurs were loving, caring, intelligent creatures changed forever our view of dinosaurs and the world in which they lived. In 1922, an American team was out searching for the origins of man in a remote part of China. Being an American expedition, it had an avalanche of cars, trucks, and 75 camels. Led by the flamboyant Roy Chapman Andrews, they were so well heeled, the Chinese government thought they were spies. After bandits, breakdowns, and the weather, the fossil hunters found a treasure trove. These early dinosaur detectives looking for human bones stumbled on a horde of perfectly preserved dinosaur eggs, the first clue that dinosaurs lived in family groups. Carefully packed in camel hair, the eggs were sent back to New York. Eggs were a beginning. Dinosaurs must have had a social life, but what was it like? The question remained unanswered for 50 years.
This is the first time I've been in this place since.
Then, in 1978, an eager young fossil hunter stumbled on clues which would transform our ideas about dinosaurs. Jack Horner was looking for eggs and baby dinosaurs in America, but he didn't find them right away.
It all really began, huh? Yeah. I went to the American Museum in New York City and looked through their collections, looked at the material that had come from Mongolia, and got an idea of what baby dinosaurs ought to look like. And people were writing papers about baby dinosaurs being extremely rare, and so I took it upon myself to go find some.
At first, he had no luck, but then a chance visit to Marion Brunvold's fossil shop gave him the break he needed.
And well, I said, I got some of these funny little bones, so I showed him some of these bones, and he wanted to know if I had more of them. I said, yeah, over at the house.
She produced 2 small pieces, and one was the thigh bone of a duck-billed dinosaur, and one was what I believe was a rib fragment. But the thigh bone was the wrong size. It was the right size for a baby. She had a coffee can full of little pieces, and what we were looking at were, as far as I knew, North America's first true baby dinosaurs.
Horner had been searching in the wrong place. Dinosaurs nested in the hills, not in the valleys. When he realized that, he found whole colonies of breeding dinosaurs.
Jack, you've got a reputation of the keenest eye in paleontology, of being able to pick out things from a bunch of rocks like this. How about showing me how you do it? Pick out one for me. I want to see an eggshell.
Well, let's go for a walk and see if we can find something. See, here we have what? Eggshell fragments.
Those?
Yeah.
Well, now, how in the world did you see that? I would never see those little tiny things.
Eggshell is really pretty common out here. In fact, it's one of the most common fossils we have in the formation. But when we find a real concentration of thousands and thousands of pieces, then we know we have a nest.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've been doing is combing the areas looking for other nests, and we've come up with 8 more. So we know that these dinosaurs nested in colonies.
Horner had discovered the eggs of a plant-eating dinosaur. It grew up to 20 feet in length and produced eggs in clutches, 20 at a time. Weighing in at about a ton, how did these dinosaurs incubate their eggs? Did they care for and feed their young, or simply abandon them? The answers have revolutionized our ideas. The name Jack Horner gave this plant eater, Maiasaura, sums up how he believes dinosaurs behaved.
We don't know how long. Can you tell me what this is?
It's nest of a Maiasaura.
Nest of a Maiasaura. Maiasaura means the good mother lizard. When did Maiasaurs live?
A real long time ago?
80 million years ago, right? Do you think dinosaurs sat on their eggs to incubate them?
Nope.
Like birds do?
No.
Why not?
Crush them.
That's right. They'd be flat, wouldn't they? That's right. So, what we think is that the mother dinosaur, covered the eggs with vegetation, and then the vegetation would begin to rot. And when things rot, it creates heat. And so that heat would have warmed the eggs. It's a pretty neat way to do it, isn't it?
Now, what are your clues that have led you to believe that the mother dinosaurs cared for their young?
The ends of the bones of the babies in the nest are not very well formed. They would have had a very large cartilaginous cap, which means that the babies couldn't walk. And they're little plant eaters, and therefore if they couldn't walk, we assume that the parent would bring food to them. We find some other stuff of these dinosaurs too. In fact, we find dinosaur stuff. We call it coprolites. You know what coprolites are? Yeah, dinosaur stuff. Yeah. We find those in the nesting grounds. And so we can look at those coprolites, and we can tell what the dinosaurs ate. And we know that the baby dinosaurs were eating berries, like you see the mother feeding them. We have what we call a coprolite, which is dinosaur dung.
Oh.
And we have some people working on it. It looks just like a sort of a black rock.
My God.
But actually what we have here is a rock that is just loaded with plant material, all this black in here. And it's mixed together with the sediment.
When I was a dinosaur detective, that looks like a rock to me.
It certainly does.
And, but what would make you look at it like that?
What we were finding were these sort of big blobs of what appears to be crushed up plant material. It's very rare out here, but we're only finding it in the nesting ground, the nesting horizons. Another clue is the shape of the skull. When we look at the baby dinosaur skulls, they have the same features that we see in birds and mammals. They have very big eyes, big brain, very short snout. It's the characters that make things like Mickey Mouse cute. What is different about them?
Their noses.
You know, their nose is very different. Now, if we look at the adult has relatively small eyes and a big, long snout, right? And we look at the babies, they have big eyes and a relatively short snout, right? Puppies are like that. If you look at a brand new puppy, they have a short nose and big eyes. They're cute, right? Some scientists think that animals feed their young if they're cute. And that's why we get fed when we're little, because we're kind of cute, right? Yeah, well, you know, when you get to be 18, then you're not cute anymore, I guess.
Only now are we beginning to ask the questions about dinosaurs that we naturally ask about our animal kingdom. For if they lived in families, how did they communicate with one another? David Weishampel thinks he knows, at least for a close relative of the good mother known as Parasaurolophus. This plant eater was 30 feet long, and on its head it had one feature that seemed made for sound, a crest 3 feet long.
How did you come to this theory that the dinosaur made sound through what would look like a horn?
Right. Well, we've got this skull. This is an animal called Parasaurolophus, and all this is bone. So that we know that when the animal breathed in, the air came in through the nostrils, went all the way to the back of the crest, and then came down this bit here, came to the back of the throat, down the windpipe into the lungs. And when it breathed out, it reversed that pattern, came back here and out here. So that if you put some sort of voice box, a sound generator here, the sound's pushed all the way through the crest and has to make that kind of sound. You can do some calculations, do some arithmetic to figure out what kinds of sounds they might have made. But the real clincher is to actually take this kind of configuration, this kind of shape, this skeletal stuff, and then make yourself a horn as well. Okay. This is a big contraption that I've made, which is the same size, it's life size of the crest of this duck-billed dinosaur, Parasaurolophus. Okay, here we go. Pretty low note, right?
Yeah, can I try it?
Hang on a second. Well, do you guys know how this would go on a Parasaurolophus?
Yeah.
Let me show you on Brent here, all right? Brent, turn your head a little bit, all right? Sort of go like this, right? Where the voice box is down here, kind of where Brent's is. And it go all the way out to here and then back down and out through his nose right there. Right? You guys want? Well, Brent, you want to try it?
Me too.
Stand up. This is the end. Buzz your lips. There you go. Whoa.
Was that for real, or was that just for the kids?
Well, no, that's actually based on a fair bit of fact from skeletal remains that we have of that particular dinosaur.
But science, of course, wants to know more. In North America, dinosaur bones get VIP treatment on the latest X-ray scanners. This is the only complete skull of a honking hadrosaur. Weishampel dare not cut it open, but the X-ray pictures let him see the horn from the inside.
What we want to do today is to investigate roughly this part of the crest right here, because there's a chance that there are intricate side passages in here which would change the kinds of sound that the animal would make. Well, I think the business about the central chamber extending so far up the crest is going to make a real difference in terms of the kinds of sounds that this animal can make. Yeah. Certainly not as simple as originally anticipated. The business of actually taking pictures from the inside out is something that is not generally available for the kinds of work that we're doing. And so this provides a picture, a window on the anatomy that's not available otherwise. So yeah, it's a tremendous value. Let me ask you this, though. A dinosaur like Parasaurolophus would want to talk to, if it was a baby, it would want to talk to the grown-ups.
His wife.
Husband and wife would want to talk to each other. And they'd want to say things like, they'd want to give out warning calls. Or they'd want to say, come over here, it's time to eat.
It's time to go to bed.
Or it's time to go to bed. or buzz off. This is, I want to be left alone, things like that.
I love you.
Maybe even I love you.
Dinosaur detectives are now convinced that dinosaurs had more ways to communicate than just by making a noise. During courtship especially, they would have used color and adornment to get their message across.
We're all familiar with certain kinds of display structures. Peacocks have wonderful showy tails which attract females. In deer, there are the magnificent antlers of the red deer stag and so on and so forth. These are display structures. And a number of dinosaurs had structures which were first and foremost very conspicuous. Many of the duck-billed dinosaurs had crests on the top of their heads. The horned dinosaurs had wonderful shields behind the skulls. These are structures which were clearly meant to be seen.
This dinosaur is called Centrosaurus, sharp-pointed reptile, because of the horns on the tip of its snout. A plant eater which topped the scales at 3 tons. During the mating season, it was capable of a fearsome display. Its 3-foot collar was rimmed with triangular lumps of horn-covered bone. By vigorously nodding its head, it warned off all but the most pugnacious of rivals. Not that this was without risk. With these, as with other dinosaurs, things could sometimes get out of hand.
I've been looking at injuries in duck-billed dinosaurs, and these features can tell us many interesting things about the lifestyle of these dinosaurs. And this animal has a series of ribs that have all been broken in a straight line and all rehealed to the same degree. We know that this injury occurred at the same time. What I think is happening here is that rival males during mating times would fight over females and may have kicked at each other with the hind feet, causing these kind of injuries.
And even when you've secured a mate, there are perils still ahead.
Now, in a normal duck-billed dinosaur, the spine is nice and straight. And as you can see with this specimen, it has been buckled and pulled over to one side, as if a great weight has pressed straight down upon it. I've come to the conclusion that these injuries were caused during mating and where accidental injuries occurred during the actual act of mating. Now, these types of injuries only occur in adults and are only reflected in the very proximal or base of the tail, which is where the reproductive organs would be in this area here. I never find multiple injuries. Like I never find an animal that has mated, been injured, and then re-injured itself. So it looks like it happened once during the animal's life. Maybe the injury made it shy away from mating in the future. Who knows?
Clue by clue, the evidence mounts on the habits and social life of dinosaurs, and not just from the odd skeleton. Here in the Badlands of Alberta, Phil Curry found clues that stretched across an area the size of a football field. In 1978, his team discovered a vast bone bed of 500 centrosaurs, apparently struck down in the prime of life. But how could this have happened, and what did it mean?
Well, bone beds are actually quite common, but it's not very often we find bone beds like this where you have only one species represented. Because of the large numbers of specimens here and the fact that they didn't come from very far upstream, it's most likely that these animals died trying to cross the river in flood. Now, this may seem like a rather fantastic explanation, but in fact there are modern analogies that show it still happens today. And in fact it happens quite frequently. Not that long ago, 10,000 caribou died in northern Quebec.
Thousands of caribou carcasses line the banks of the Kaniapiskau River in northern Quebec. Inuit work crews have started collecting the caribou out of the water before it freezes in 2 or 3 weeks. The decaying carcasses were strewn along a 50-kilometer stretch of the river and are now creating a major pollution threat to aquatic life. Biologists who inspected the riverbank were shocked.
Whenever you get large groups of herbivorous animals, whether they're dinosaurs or mammals, together and they're moving in some kind of a migratory pattern, they're likely to encounter some kind of a natural disaster that will wipe out large numbers of them during the course of the migration. Given the evidence we have now from Arctic Canada and Alaska, there's a very good chance that dinosaurs were taking advantage of the high plant productivity in the Arctic, because during the summer months, with 24 hours of sunlight during the daytime, plants just produce so much food that animals will always try and take advantage of it.
Covering up to 70 miles a day, the vast centrosaur herds swept northwards in the summer toward the Arctic feeding grounds. In the autumn, as the days began to draw in, a huge migration southward would begin. This cycle of life would be repeated, echoing the seasons 70 million years ago. Today, the remains of huge herds of dinosaurs are being discovered around the world. In Montana, a vast bone bed tells Jack Horner what happened to the young myosaurs after they left the nest.
It gives us a social picture on a grand scale. This is just a tiny piece of one of our bone beds. What it is a mass accumulation of myosaur skeletons ranging from yearlings to full-grown, and our conservative estimate is 10,000 individuals. The story, that we've been able to put together is that we have these large groups of herbivores that are migrating north to south up and down this thin piece of West America.
What was this place like at the time these dinosaurs roamed these plains?
80 million years ago, the Rocky Mountains were here, but they were about 30 miles west of here. And then there was a broad plain that came from the Rocky Mountains and extended all the way into eastern Montana. It was about 300 miles, and then came to that inland seaway extended from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean.
If you're one of a herd of, say, 1,000 hadrosaurs moving around the countryside, you couldn't stay in one place for very long, simply because that number of animals would eat themselves out of house and home very quickly indeed. So you follow the food resource. Well, an obvious parallel would be caribou. So really one can envisage the herds of hadrosaurs moving much like caribou do, with perhaps the tyrannosaurs being similar to wolves, following the herds, picking off the lame, the infirm, and the young, and having a very similar relationship that we see today in caribou and wolves.
Guided by an acute sense of smell and aided by stereoscopic vision, the Tyrannosaurus would close in. Its prey secured, this superbly designed killing machine would tear apart its catch and down it in huge gulps. Some killers are smaller but are no less fearsome. In 1964, John Ostrom made a startling discovery. A new type of killer, a small lithe animal with a razor-sharp weapon, a wickedly hooked claw on its hind foot. He called it Deinonychus, terrible claw.
But Deinonychus certainly opened up a whole new window in viewing these animals. This animal clearly indicated extreme agility, activity, perhaps even intelligence, but these were very, very sophisticated animals, unlike our previous image of what dinosaurs were about.
Here were dinosaurs at their most terrifying. They weren't just active killers, they hunted in packs.
But we found the remains of at least 4 and probably 5 different predators, Deinonychus, that apparently were killed in the process of attacking a much larger prey animal that these animals apparently hunted in packs, like wolves, which makes a lot of sense when you realize that the animal that they were trying to, and did, kill was 5 or 10 times larger than the killer.
To combat the threat of agile predators, giants like this plant-eater Tyrannosaurus had to move fast to or perish. Some dinosaur detectives see this as evidence that they were just like the active mammals of today. Others are not so sure. The giant Brachiosaurus may provide some clues to the pace of dinosaurs.
Can you really apply these arguments to animals this size, a 40 or 30-ton dinosaur? I think not. I think there are actually models for these sorts of creatures which much more fit them to being a classic reptile. We know that the head was able to be craned up some 30 to 35 feet above the ground to reach the tops of the trees they fed on. Now, if the animal has its brain and head at that height, then there's an enormous distance that the blood has to travel to get up to the brain, and the heart will therefore have to generate a great deal of pressure to push the blood up that height. That gives the animals potential for a great deal of activity. So these actually are pretty wondrous animals because they're combining some of the best attributes of the animals that are so active today, the mammals and birds, with the economy of lifestyle that's associated with a reptile. Basically, they're dinosaurs, and that makes them something very special.
It was an egg that led Jack Horner to discover that dinosaurs were complex animals. They cared for and reared their young. It was bones like these that led an inquiring Bob Bacher to an even more radical idea. Until he came along, most dinosaur detectives assumed that dinosaurs were like lizards and crocodiles, were cold-blooded, in other words. But in the 1970s, he began a revolution. He came up with an idea, that's still controversial today. Bob, your idea is that these things were warm-blooded, huh?
Well, absolutely. I grew up in the 4th grade with brontosaurs like this in the Life magazine. Gray, stupid, slow, up to its armpits in some fetid swamp. But when I got to studying the guy, I found out that nose to tail and shoulder to toes, they had it all wrong. It saw in color, and animals that see in color have bright colors to attract mates. So don't think of Brontosaurus as gray. Think of the bull Brontosaurus as some brilliant crimson or bright blue or a metallic green to attract a mate. Now, if you get into the heart of the matter, literally, I'm going to crawl into the cardiac chamber here, you see something astonishing. And when the penny dropped and I realized this, I just kicked myself. Why didn't I think of this before? This chamber here in the front of the chest, there's only one organ there, the heart.
Let me come up there and have a closer look at that.
Have a heart-to-heart here. This gigantic chamber housed a heart that would be hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Today, only warm-blooded active animals have huge hearts. And going aft, the hip socket, wonderful joint, designed to let this whole hind leg swing backwards and forwards in an efficient, like a pendulum.
This suggesting that the animal was far more active than our idea of this sloth-like creature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Evolution is very careful. Evolution doesn't build in excess stuff. It's not like the Pentagon. There are no cost overruns in Brontosaurus. Natural selection worked on this beast to give it the knee and the thigh and the lungs and the heart that it needed. And it gave them warm-blooded specifications. Pound for pound, there's more strength in these legs than there is in a modern elephant, and much more strength than in a cold-blooded tortoise. This is a biological machine designed for pumping, for moving with tremendous activity.
was never like this in my day. I'll tell you, now with the use of songs and dances and games and visuals of all kinds, these youngsters, through the use of dinosaurs, are learning about the world around them in a way that's absolutely astounding to, well, to dinosaurs like me.
The work of dinosaur detectives has turned dinosaurs into learning tools. Children all over the world can now explore their fantasies and learn at the same time.
They get interested in them as early as 4, and then at 5 they're very mystical, and then after that I think they start getting more interested in learning why did they die out? You know, why aren't they around anymore? Where did they live? You know, all of that sort of thing. I think they become more interested in the facts afterwards, but the young children, the kindergartners, are just interested in them just for life's sake.
I think any teacher probably jumps at the chance, because if you've got something that is a motivator, I mean, whatever it is you use, and this, I've never met a child who wasn't interested in dinosaurs in some way. And the more you read and the more you hear, the more interested you become, because there are mysteries involved, and I think mysteries are always something that turn us on.
In southern France, in the sleepy town of Esperanza, the tranquility is deceptive. Here, too, lies a mystery that has captured the imagination of the local community.
Gwen. Hi, Gwen.
It's being unraveled by these children and their very special teacher as they piece together the clues in the classroom in the hills nearby.
Gwen, qu'est-ce que c'est?
Just outside the town is a dinosaur nesting site which the children have made their own. So many eggs have been found that it has put Esperanza on the map and made these junior dinosaur detectives the talk of France.
All children are interested in dinosaurs. That's true. Everyone is aware of it, from 7 to 77. Those in Esperanza in particular, because they have had the opportunity to touch the bones and the eggs on the site.
Les os, les œufs.
Ouh,
superbe. Prêtez-moi ça là. Oh, superbe.
The eggs are those of a giant Hypsilosaurus. Yet for all their size, they must have tiptoed with great daintiness between nests crowded with babies. Such discoveries may bring fame and fortune to Esperanza. The eggs may be the key to its economic future.
Actuellement, ce que vous avez vu aujourd'hui.
In fact, what you've seen today is only an exhibition, a small temporary exhibition. But the town council, the mayor, have much more important plans for exhibiting the whole of the collections. We hope to create a museum of the upper valley of the Aude, a regional museum of great importance, which is likely to bring a revival, a lift, to the economy of Esperanza, which has great need of it. And we think that this museum will attract many tourists, many people from all over Europe.
In America, too, the thrill of a fossil find can capture the minds of children. Some already are dinosaur detectives in the making.
Isn't this where you found yours there? Yeah. Let's sit down. I'd like to hear more about how you found it.
One day, me and my dad was walking down this creek, and I saw these teeth, like right in here, sticking out in the rock.
That's a pretty neat job. These dinosaurs are pretty interesting. This one that you found, Thad, is a plant-eating dinosaur. It's probably about 113 million years old or so. This other one that you found was a plant-eater as well. This was a little baby. It was found washed out to sea and is only about maybe 98 million years old or something like that. Why do you like dinosaurs?
I wanted to find out what animals ate what other kind of animals.
What do you want to be when you grow up, Thad?
I'm going to be a dinosaur finder, a paleontologist, a scientist that finds bones.
Well, you know, a lot of people find fossil dinosaurs when they're just out looking. A lot of them. You don't have to be a paleontologist to find one. You can just be someone that likes to look.
From the earliest pioneers, it's been dedicated amateurs who have often made the most spectacular finds. Searching out dinosaur bones is a passion of Kathy Wankel. Her obsession paid off one weekend while exploring the Badlands of Montana.
It was Labor Day weekend of 1988. My husband and I were hiking around this area. I had spotted a small ridge of white sticking out of the dirt. We walked over about in this area. I knew it was a dinosaur bone. I could see the bone marrow, and I had picked up fossils before, and I just knew it was, and I was really hoping it was a T-Rex. I just had a feeling that it might be. I don't know if it was premonition or what, but I was real excited about it. I thought it was a mega find. That's what I called my dad and told him it was a mega find. And he said, oh, it's probably just some old cow bones. He didn't have faith in me.
Jack Horner did, and Kathy Wankel's T-Rex has become the latest star exhibit at the Museum of the Rockies.
Good amateur paleontologists are extremely important. There are only a few of us paleontologists in Montana, and the state is 600 miles long and 400 miles wide, and there are lots and lots of areas that have good fossils in them. So eyes out looking for us are what we need. In fact, in our museum, we have 6 or 7 big exhibits, and all of the specimens we have were found by amateurs. The important thing is that the amateur bring it to the museum rather than take it home and put it in his garage.
How did you first get interested in dinosaur bones?
Oh, I think it dates back to the uranium days when we were prospecting for uranium. I found this big humerus, that's the upper arm bone, and it's now in the Smithsonian, but finding this big bone kind of set us off on that.
I've been looking around this quarry, for instance, and it looks to me like bones look like rocks. I don't know how an amateur would ever tell one from a rock.
Bones do look like rocks, and you have to learn how to distinguish a rock. A bone has cell structure, just like our bones in our body. You know, we have cell structure. Wood has grain. So I look for that cell structure, and it's there if you look for it. And it's just like anything else. You learn to know what you're looking for.
But you can see that just with the naked eye as you walk across a bunch of rock?
Yes, after a while. Mm-hmm.
Vivian Jones has walked these hills of Colorado for 40 years. Her numerous discoveries have helped dinosaur Jim Jensen uncover some major finds. How did you discover this particular site?
Well, I was looking over this little opening on this hillside, and I found this very strange shaped bone, and I did not know what it was, so I decided to take it home and put it up until I saw Jim the next time to get it identified.
What were you doing with them?
Well, at first we were just kind of storing them, not knowing what to do with them, and then Jim came by, and he was our savior.
In what sense was he your savior?
Well, he just asked us if we would work with him if we were to find anything, and we were more than happy to do that.
And as a result of that, they made a tremendous contribution to science, actually, because of the finds they made. I was able to open up 4 quarries in these mountains and recover the most new dinosaurs that anyone's ever found.
Today, chance discoveries are being helped by science. Dinosaur hunters use technology to detect what the eye cannot see. That's the theory, anyway. In practice, finding dinosaurs is still, shall we say, a hit-and-miss affair.
Got a misfire, wait a minute.
Roland, you know it's all your fault that we got involved in all this confusion
Wait
here.
a minute. You led me on by saying paleontology was in the Dark Ages and we needed to do some real science.
Well, that we were in the Dark Ages then, and I think we still are.
Ready?
I'm ready, arm it.
Ready?
Seriously, this all began when I gave a seminar at Los Alamos and challenged scientists like Roland and others here into helping us conduct this excavation. The specific problem that I posed was, can we see the bones in the ground before we excavate them? And the reason I needed to know the answers was that we had 10 feet of rock to remove before we could get down to bone level if this skeleton were to continue into the hill the way we projected. Okay, Cliff, show us some bones here. What do you got?
Time will tell whether high tech can reveal all about this particular dinosaur. It's called Seismosaurus, and it may turn out to be the biggest dinosaur ever. But that's not all. The bones found so far are in the same position they had in life, articulated, and that's a crucial lead for dinosaur detectives.
Probably the most important feature about this skeleton is the fact that it's articulated. The reason we like to have articulated skeletons is that it allows us to know exact positions for each bone, and that's important in our descriptions and analytical work. In this case, the articulation was also important because we have a series of stomach stones that were found in direct association with the bones, like the stones in this circle, which are the gastroliths that were used for grinding food. They represent the substitute for teeth. In the sauropod dinosaurs, the teeth were about the size of my finger. They couldn't grind food. Instead, all they could do was rake food off the vegetation. And there was no grinding mechanism at all in the jaws. The only capacity for processing food mechanically was with gastroliths, grinding in a grinding mill so that the food would be crushed and processed, readied for chemical digestion in the stomach. And it's a fair estimate to say that they ate around a ton, or 2,000 pounds of food in a day. They processed that much plant material. Like any scientific investigation, there's always a wild card. The wild card in our study is the occurrence of this gastrolith, which is so much larger than elsewhere. We were astonished. This one weighs over 2 pounds, and it's 5 or 6 times larger than this one. One idea we have is that perhaps this was the one that caused the extinction of this individual when he choked to death.
However that Seismosaurus died, giants like him survived, generation after generation, for 130 million years. But how did they manage to survive for so long?
In fact, all dinosaurs would fit in the same size range as our known range of living and fossil mammals. So the question really ought to be, why aren't more mammals dinosaur size? Because they certainly can get to be that big. Well, I think it's something to do with the difference in reproduction between mammals and dinosaurs. Large mammals, like elephants, only have one young every 3 or 4 years, whereas dinosaurs we know could lay 20 eggs at a go and may have bred more often. As the Ice Ages, the large mammals were the ones that went out, probably because when they had a bad winter or something, and many of them died, they couldn't rapidly rebuild their populations. Now, a dinosaur laying 20 eggs, sure, under most conditions, most of those young would die, but it would mean they had the capacity to rebuild populations quickly, which would be impossible for a mammal.
Today, those dinosaur corpses have brought a not always welcome new enterprise. For hard on the heels of the amateurs has come a new gold rush. Professional dinosaur hunters like Peter Larson walk a thin line between making money out of dinosaur finds and scientific research.
Well, there is a bit of a controversy about being able to actually sell dinosaur bones. Actually, this is a way that I've found to be able to do what I want with my life. Those of us who work in this company have a real commitment to science. It's our thing. We not only supply specimens, dinosaurs, to museums who otherwise would not be able to afford to get them, or perhaps places like Japan, which really has no dinosaur skeletons. The only way they can see a real dinosaur is to buy one. And the children who live in Japan have just as much right to see a dinosaur as the children who live here in the United States. And here we have an abundance of dinosaurs, and we can supply dinosaurs to those museums where they otherwise would not be able to have them.
In the summer of 1990, Peter Larson came up with the find of his life.
Well, this turns out to be the largest Tyrannosaurus that has ever been found. We kind of like to name our fossils when we find them to give them sort of a personality. It was found by Susan Hendrickson, so we came up with the name Sue. Sue is going to be the cornerstone of our museum, which we've been working on, in fact, which I've been dreaming of since I was a little kid. And Sue will be mounted in Hill City, South Dakota in our new museum.
Although Larson didn't know it at the time, Sue may be a fitting name for this, the largest tyrannosaur ever. Its size probably meant that Sue was a female and more than able to stand her ground against a smaller male. She needed to be larger to nurture the eggs inside her. Such new information is grist to the mill for amateur dinosaur enthusiasts. Tom Strauss, here in the shed at the bottom of his garden, is an engineer by day. His obsession with dinosaurs lacks the resources for anything but a one-man exhibition. But his homemade movies have won him a delighted, if limited, audience.
When I was a kid, I was fascinated by dinosaurs by the original motion picture of King Kong. From that moment on, I had an urge to do my own motion picture. The project started off when I was in high school. At the time, money was very scarce. I used these wire keys from a guitar of mine. And primarily, most of this is from bicycle chains and washers, nuts and bolts. That was generally what was available for me. And in order to keep this creature suspended in air while you're animating them one frame at a time. In the beginning, I had no experience on it, and I had to learn, and I kind of felt the best way to learn is to do it. At the time, people felt that the dinosaurs were very cold-blooded, and I really didn't believe it. And I wanted also to project these animals to show that they had feelings toward their offspring. I knew that the fight scene was terrifying. And I did have an audience of kids viewing my film. When I was showing this to this group of kids, and I took my eye off the screen and watched the faces on the kids, and especially the point where the fight was going on, and some of the reactions from these kids were they were covering their faces and they turned their head. It electrified me.
Dinosaurs to kids are particularly exciting because they're bigger than houses and things, and they're exciting to kids, and they're scary, but they don't have to worry about them anymore because they're gone. So it's something they can talk about and feel like they're their friends of this big 60-foot tall brachiosaurus, but at the same time, they don't have to worry about getting stepped on by one.
My favorite dinosaur is Tyrannosaurus Rex. They're interesting and they're big, so big. They're real neat and fascinating. They're big and scary.
Stimulating that imagination is a young people's dig and campsite at Egg Mountain. It's an open-air workshop inspired by Jack Horner.
We saw some children out there today, a very bright little 9-year-old fellow. Tell us something about the camp. I mean, what is it exactly?
Well, it's run as a field school. It's a place where interested people can come out and really be part of the research, be part of what really goes on here.
Since Jack Horner first discovered dinosaur eggs in America in 1978, hundreds of children of all ages have spent time on Egg Mountain. For Horner, it's the climax of a long career.
What would you like to be remembered for?
Probably the behavior. That's been what I've been working on all this time.
Behavior of the dinosaurs?
Behavior of the dinosaurs, yes.
This is what dinosaurs are good for, education and learning about life and the history of life, so that we know what our world is about and what's going to happen to our world. They should be used for research and education. They should be used to encourage people like Johnny and Thad into science.
And of course, the biggest joy in fossils is the actual discovery, actually finding these rocks which no one's ever seen before, these evidence of ancient life. And we just can't deny that to the young kids, because that's what really gets you hooked on fossils and really gets you hooked on science. And we've got to allow them to be able to go out and look for these fossils and find them, because without the kids, there's no future in paleontology.
Bob, of all your discoveries out here, what would you like to be most remembered for?
Wow. I guess helping to give dinosaurs better respect. That they weren't cold-blooded, stupid, gray, dim-witted, bad mothers and stuck in miasmic swamps. They were lively, they were colorful, incredibly interesting.
Jack Horner and others revolutionized our idea of dinosaurs. Out went the idea that they were lumbering, slumbering giants. Now we know that they were among the most successful creatures that ever lived on this planet. But if that's the case, why did they die out? Well, some think it was a mass extinction. Others are not so sure. And did all the dinosaurs die out, or perhaps did some survive in a different form? For some clues to the death of the dinosaurs, join me for our next episode. You know, Paul, I always thought that eating chicken was, well, just eating chicken until I found out that some dinosaur detectives think that chicken, like all birds generally, are dinosaurs. That's a pretty amazing thought until you think about all the clues they've picked up so far.
Really?
Really?
Well, when did it start?
Well, it started quite a long time ago, back in 1861, in a quarry in Germany. Some workers found a small dinosaur and the perfectly preserved impression of a feather. The feather that was found in southern Germany caused an uproar. The 19th century fossil hunters, dinosaur detectives, were confused, for the feather should not have been there at all. The limestone rock dated back to the age of dinosaurs, millions of years before birds were thought to have evolved.
I think it was a real bombshell when this feather was found. You can imagine it was only 2 years later, after Charles Darwin had published his book on the origin of species, founding his theory of evolution. And in 1861, a single bird feather was found in these quarries in the Solnhofen lithographic limestone.
Searching frantically for more evidence, the fossil hunters soon found a second clue. But this only turned the puzzle into a mystery. The experts were thrown into total confusion when close by the feather, they found the complete skeleton of a small bird, or they thought it was a bird. They called it Archaeopteryx, ancient wing.
And this was even more exciting because it showed both reptilian and avian characters. And there was, of course, a debate which one it was. Was it a reptile with feathers, or was it a bird, despite its reptilian skeleton? And this caused a great and sometimes dramatic argument among different scientists, because it turned out that it really was a missing link between two classes of vertebrates, between the reptiles and between the birds, and showing evidently that there must have been a transition between these two reptiles towards birds in evolution.
For decades, dinosaur experts could not decide. Was Archaeopteryx a bird with teeth or a reptile with feathers? Was it a freak of nature or a new insight into evolution? The feather and the skeleton remained a mystery.
It really is an enigma in many respects. It shows, for example, along the forelimb here, 3 quite prominent, sharp claws. You don't associate those with the wing of a bird. If you look at the tail, back here, you see there's a bony spine. Those 2 features themselves are very typically reptilian. Also, if you look at the head of the creature up here, you can follow along the line of the jaws these little spiky teeth. These 3 characteristics are not typical of those of birds. The long, bony tail, the dinosaur-like claws on the hand, the teeth in the jaws.
From the time of its discovery until the mid-1970s, Archaeopteryx has been regarded as a linchpin in the evolution of birds. The problem was identifying precisely which group of reptiles was closest to Archaeopteryx and therefore to birds. In 1973, the problem was looked at afresh by a modern dinosaur detective, John Ostrom. Starting at Sohnhofen, where else, he looked again at the clues.
Oh, well, it has such beautiful fossil material from that very fine-grained lithographic limestone. And it's almost like photographs of things that once lived in a lagoonal kind of setting 150 million years ago. That exquisite material. It's a glimpse into the past that I don't know of any other place that produces such wonderful, wonderful material. I see the rock record as a vast library, but most of the pages are blank. There are pages that are just full of information, like the Solenhofen limestones have produced for us. My fieldwork expeditions has been tracing down blank pages because there have to be pieces of information on those blank pages that simply haven't been discovered yet. And I've been very fortunate in finding some evidence on some of those blank pages.
The mine in Bavaria has filled in some of the gaps. Because the lagoon in which the feather and skeleton were preserved is unique, the remains of Archaeopteryx and other creatures are perfect in every detail.
The nature of the preservation we find in the Solenhofen material, it's exquisite. One of the most remarkable of all finds, of course, are those specimens of Archaeopteryx, in particular the Berlin specimen, which shows such beautiful detail of the feather imprints. It's remarkable, a kind of photographic image almost that is preserved from 150 million years ago.
Only 6 skeletons of Archaeopteryx have been discovered over the years. One found in 1951 has a most curious tale to tell. It is kept under lock and key at Eichstätt Castle in Bavaria. It held a clue to dinosaurs as the ancestors of birds. For 25 years, this specimen was classified as the dinosaur Compsognathus, simply because it had no feathers preserved around its skeleton. Was Archaeopteryx really a missing link between dinosaurs and birds? A crossover point at which the dinosaur family split, and one line, millions of years later, became true birds. Our detectives are still examining the evidence. To get more clues, Peter Wellnhofer has made a cast of this fossil, and by coating it in gold, he can examine it in detail under the electron microscope.
One of the most striking features in Archaeopteryx is that it has teeth, and these are in fact reptilian teeth. I'm trying to compare the teeth of Archaeopteryx with the teeth of Compsognathus. Compsognathus, of course, is a small dinosaur, which is supposed to be closely related to Archaeopteryx.
The small dinosaur Compsognathus may hold the key to Archaeopteryx ancestry. Could it be a close relative?
Well, if you take a quick look at the anatomy of something like Compsognathus, this nice model, which is actual size, and look at the anatomy of Compsognathus, or as you see it preserved in that fine specimen, compare that with the skeletal remains in Archaeopteryx. There are so many skeletal details that one has to conclude, I think, that they came from a common ancestor. They evolved from the same source of a small dinosaur of this general kind.
Without those feather impressions, it would have been impossible to actually say that this was a bird, because if you look simply at the skeleton of this creature, the skeleton is that pretty typically of a little carnivorous dinosaur.
The bird-dinosaur nature of Archaeopteryx prompts other questions. Could it fly like a bird?
The main feature which distinguishes Archaeopteryx from other dinosaurs is that it's got feathers. And we think they acted aerodynamically. Now, if you look at the feather of a modern bird, like this swan, and compare it with the feather of Archaeopteryx, you see exactly the same structure. Central shaft with veins radiating off it. What's most important, the shaft doesn't run down the middle of the feather, it runs slightly off to the side. And that means the feather aerodynamically is optimally designed. There's no reason for Archaeopteryx to have a feather like that unless it flew. I wouldn't want to say Archaeopteryx is definitely an ancestor of all modern birds, but it is the closest specimen we've got to that lineage. Archaeopteryx itself may have been a dead end, but on the other hand, there would have been animals probably quite similar to it, which weren't dead ends. And the sort of changes which had to happen would have been a loss of the bony tail, further reduction in weight, like thinning the skull, losing teeth, losing anything which is unnecessary, like the claws on the forelimbs. When we get to the next fossil birds after Archaeopteryx, all these changes have happened.
I like to think of it as almost a snapshot in time, of course, evolutionary change in the act of changing.
Evolution caught in the act? Archaeopteryx is got to be the nearest we've got to what is effectively an evolutionary missing link. It's lying very, very close to the borderline between what is effectively a true dinosaur and what is perhaps one of the earliest known birds. Archaeopteryx is the nearest we'll ever get to catching evolution in the act.
Dinosaurs did not really become extinct. They left their offspring, and these are the birds, and it's some kind of happy feeling to see birds flying over you and regarding them as dinosaurs.
The link between dinosaurs and birds, first established in Germany and developed by men like John Ostrom and Peter Wellnhofer, is worth celebrating. Dinosaur detectives don't find missing links every day, but as they toast, other investigators are proposing even more radical ideas. In America, some now suggest that the most fearsome meat eater of all time, T. rex, is closely related to a bird.
Bob, where do you stand on this bird-dinosaur link controversy?
Well, I stand with Thomas Henry Huxley, who in 1868 said that birds are the direct descendants of dinosaurs. What he pointed out, still true today, you look at a meat-eating dinosaur like Tyrannosaurus rex, and the hind foot looks like a bird. It's got 3 toes that face forwards, little toe in the back, short torso, curved neck, short but strong front legs. The overall gestalt is like a bird. But now we have a lot more evidence. If you look at a bird head, this is an ostrich, okay, it's the eye socket there, And look at how the jaw attaches to the head. Well, it attaches right there. And there's a pair of grooves that are oblique. They go inwards and forwards, and lower jaw slides when an ostrich bites, slides. There's only one type of prehistoric animal that has a sliding jaw joint like that, only one. That's the big meat-eating dinosaurs. Okay? So there's a detailed mechanical resemblance between a dinosaur and a bird. This gigantic jaw could slide backwards and forwards, just like a 4-foot-long ostrich jaw. But the thing I really love is, most people think of birds as delicate, and Tyrannosaurus rex is rather big and crude. It's not true. Tyrannosaurus rex is incredibly closely related to birds. There's the T-Rex head. Giant, 5 feet long, and it looks massive. It looks real solid. But it's not. It's hollowed out. Nearly every bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex skull was penetrated by air ducts connecting to the lungs, exactly as in a bird skull, exactly. Down to fine details of where the nerves and blood vessels go, and these air ducts, Tyrannosaurus rex is a bird head. It's a bird brain and an airhead. You take your ostrich, get a chicken, maybe you're a pigeon, cut the skull away, and you'll see a ductwork just like that. So whether you're talking about overall resemblance or detailed plumbing, birds are dinosaurs, and your parakeet is a close cousin of Tyrannosaurus rex?
Well, now in the detective work, to get to this theory, which sounds perfectly plausible to me, but to get to that, from the middle of the 19th century, what's new? What has been added in the number of clues that bring you to the conclusion now that seems so definite?
Well, by 1870, they knew that some sort of dinosaur was the direct ancestor of birds. They really had a good case. They also knew it was probably a meat-eating dinosaur. But they didn't know which of the many meat-eating dinosaurs was closest to birds. What we've added in the last couple of years is it's the very advanced, air-conditioned meat-eaters like Tyrannosaurus or the little Troodon. Those are the guys who are very, very, very close.
So really, in all these years that we've been talking about the extinct dinosaur, we've just been wrong.
That's right. Dinosaurs aren't extinct. You can think of Tyrannosaurus rex as the 8,000-pound roadrunner from hell.
While meat-eating dinosaurs have their own evolutionary tales to tell, so too do the plant eaters. Living alongside Archaeopteryx, there were the giant dinosaurs like Diplodocus and Brachiosaurus. These were the first creatures ever to feed upon tall trees. To do this, they had to evolve extremely long necks.
This creature was able to reach very, very high up into the trees. The trees that grew at this time were primarily conifers. They were very tall, and most of the vegetation was clustered near the top. So this was an ideal way of reaching giraffe-like right up into the trees to actually crop the vegetation. It has very large peg-like teeth, which would have been ideal for scraping or nipping off small branches. It could be a very effective hoover-up of all the rubbish in the environment, in a sense, all the relatively indigestible twigs and pine cones and leaves and needles. They have a very complex digestive system. The stomach would be a large muscular sac, lined, in this case, with large, rounded, polished pebbles. These would be acting like a mill to pummel up the plant food. The teeth weren't designed to chew up the food, so it uses stones in its stomach instead. Once it's reduced the plant food to a mushy pulp, it's then passed on to another part of the digestive system at the back end. And here, there are like long cavernous tubes, and this mushy plant material passes into those tubes where it's mixed up with the bacteria, which then break down and produce the chemicals that allow the animal to live.
Against these giant feeding machines, the plants fought back. From their struggle to survive, a more varied and beautiful environment began to emerge.
Any large herbivore has a tremendous effect on the vegetation that it eats, and to tear down trees, to remove large branches and that sort of thing, that has an effect on the vegetation. It has an effect on individual trees, and it also opens clearings in the forest. And elephants act in that way even today. Large trees may, in a sense, not have any choice but to defend what they are. And so they would develop mechanisms of defense, for instance, spines or sharp pointed leaves, or perhaps chemical toxins that would deter those big herbivores. But if you're a small plant, a weedy thing that's doesn't have a very big body to begin with, it may be that it's much easier, rather than to try to defend that, to begin to grow very rapidly, to get through a life cycle quickly before you're eaten. So I think the first flowering plants may have fallen very naturally into a defense mechanism that wasn't so much a defense as it was an escape from herbivores, from the big dinosaurs that were after them.
The next wave of big plant eaters had short necks, fed close to the ground. One thing flowering plants do, better than any other type of plant, is they can spread rapidly and regenerate themselves after heavy grazing.
Near the end of the dinosaurs' reign lived centrosaurs in large herds. Thousands roamed the plains in search of food. Weighing 3 tons with sharp beaks and great powerful jaws, they wreaked havoc. Plants had only one defense: to blossom in profusion to survive.
And flowers just explode across the landscape. It's an incredible, the biggest event in plant evolution are the flowers coming in, and people have asked why. And I think the answer is dinosaurs invented flowers.
The evolution of plants and animals takes place over millions of years. One way to grasp such a vast time scale is to place Earth's history against a tall building, like the World Trade Center here in New York City. Earth's creation's at the ground floor. We're at the top floor. Dinosaurs first appeared a staggering 225 million years ago and ruled for the next 150 million years. They only died out 65 million years ago. We humans arrived only yesterday, 3 million years ago. Makes me feel quite young. You know, Paul, for all of our discoveries and detective work, we still know fairly little about the dinosaurs, how they lived, how they died. Perhaps if we discover all the answers, we'll find some clues that might guarantee our stay on Earth. Perhaps we will, perhaps we won't.
These birds migrate every year to the 4 corners of the globe, just like their dinosaur forefathers used to roam the entire world millions of years ago.
But if the dinosaurs dominated the planet for so long, why? Why did they die out? What happened? Let's look at the clues again to see if there's any hope of solving this mystery. In 1789, in revolutionary France, death and extinction were everywhere, not of dinosaurs, but a whole class of humans. As the guillotine wiped out the French nobility, one man watched the carnage and survived. The aristocratic Baron Georges Cuvier observed the calamity that had befallen France and applied it to the animal kingdom. In Earth's long history, had whole classes of creatures become extinct? From his laboratory full of fossils, Cuvier thought they had.
Cuvier was the first scientist to unequivocally establish the fact of extinction. It seems so basic now, we are amazed that it was ever doubted, but before Cuvier's time, first of all, some people thought the Earth wasn't very old, so that didn't give a lot of time for a history that would have included extinction. It was Cuvier who, by studying the anatomy, mostly of mammals, established without any doubt that there had been successive extinctions through time. Now, that may not seem very important, but if you think about it for a moment, you'll realize that without extinction, the Earth has no history that can be measured. If all animals were made at the beginning and nothing ever changed, you'd have no criterion whereby you could assess the age of rocks and establish a sequence of history. By establishing extinction, you make it clear that some creatures lived early, some lived in the middle, some lived late, and consequently, by establishing the fact of the sequence of extinctions, the Earth attains a history for the first time.
Cuvier painstakingly dissected living animals and compared them with fossil types. As a result, he had an encyclopedic knowledge of animals and was able to show that some fossil animals did not have any living relatives. They had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. This detective work set the stage for Charles Darwin to establish a mechanism for evolutionary change, natural selection. Through this, he showed how species gradually replace one another in the struggle for existence.
The Darwin system provides a close and continuous tracking of environmental change. Environment changes and organisms change slowly and steadily to match those alterations. It gets colder, elephants grow hair, and you have woolly mammoths. That's slightly oversimplified, but there it is. Now, if that was all there was, then there might be a much more sensible pattern. Life would match environments. Much of evolutionary change would be progressive because you'd have animals struggling with other animals, and the ones that were biomechanically more efficient would eventually win. Everything would get better and would track local environments. The problem is that on top of that, you have these very large-scale environmental changes, the catastrophes of mass extinction being the best example, which destabilize that system and provokes sudden changes well beyond the capacity of any organism to adapt to it. Then many are going to die. Just simply die as species. They'll be gone.
At the dawn of the dinosaurs was Coelophysis. Lively and intelligent, it was well on the way to establishing the reign of the dinosaurs. Ironically, no sooner had Coelophysis got a foothold than the species was wiped out by a catastrophe. But rather than sealing the fate of the dinosaurs, this event gave dinosaurs as a whole their chance to achieve supremacy on land. For long before dinosaurs died out, the rock record reveals an earlier, near extinction that killed off many of the early dinosaurs like Coelophysis. In Nova Scotia, the red rock is punctuated by a significant white line. It marks a catastrophic event. Below it, Coelophysis and other early dinosaurs have been found. Above it, Coelophysis is absent, but in its place are the remains of later, more developed dinosaurs. Here at this site, two dinosaur detectives believe they have the evidence to show how dinosaurs rose to conquer the earth.
At this white line here, we have basically a bookmark between two great chapters in dinosaur evolution. We see preserved here one of the four largest mass extinctions in the history of life on this planet. I mean, about 40% of the animal life that was on land quickly disappeared, became extinct. Well, here we have a large mass extinction. What you got to wonder is what's the cause? There are lots of ideas, but one that's very tempting to us is that this extinction coincides with one of the largest known asteroid impacts in the history of life. There are several different ways that it could bring about a mass extinction. Well, first you have this huge rock, which may be 10 to 20 miles in diameter, hitting the Earth at great speed. That's going to release a lot of energy into the atmosphere. And not only energy, but dust. And it's that dust that could block sunlight, that could interact with gases in the atmosphere to produce acid rain, changes in temperature, changes in the light cycle. It'll affect the creatures that are around directly, but it'll also kill what they're eating, so it'll cascade through the food chain.
After that catastrophe, within 10,000 years, a huge amount of lava poured out on the surface in this region. In fact, lava poured out from Nova Scotia to South Carolina, a huge series of lava lakes.
We have a very unique record of this large mass extinction. The reason why it's a unique record is because we're sampling from a whole wide variety of environments. We have fossil lakes, we have fossil deserts, we have fossil streams, and so we're sampling from the creatures that lived within those. And we're getting a very good idea of what the diversity of life was like, both before the extinction and after the extinction.
The evidence for survivors are found all over these cliffs. Specifically, we find lots of little bits of bone, pieces of jaw, pieces of skull and backbone, the creatures that survived. One of the first things we find are tiny footprints. This footprint probably belongs to a creature that looked like this, a small dinosaur no bigger than my hand. One of the typical survivors, a beautiful little animal, very graceful, almost bird-like. The other clues we found include these little bones. This is typical of the mammals and mammal-like reptiles that survived the boundary along with the dinosaurs. You have both forms. They're similar in size. They're similar in the fact that they survived the boundary, but for some reason, one group, the dinosaurs, becomes dominant over the next 150 million years.
The destruction that wiped out so many species allowed the best adapted dinosaurs to fill the void left by others. In all their rich diversity, they evolved and flourished.
The asteroid hits and produces a whole spate of environmental changes, and then some creatures make it and some creatures don't. But insofar as whether you make it or not is dependent upon features that you evolved for other reasons and not because you knew that an asteroid was hitting, in some deep sense you get through a mass extinction by good fortune. But I don't mean that it's random in some technical sense. You get through for a reason, but the reason has nothing to do with why you evolved those features in the first place. So I think that would qualify in our ordinary language as good luck. And I would say, yes, most creatures get through mass extinction by something akin to what our language would call good luck.
One thing that may have been very important in the dinosaurs' success over the mammals was their wonderful adaptations for running. That's something which sets them apart, as you can see in these two reconstructions. The dinosaurs are built for speed and power. The mammals are built for burrowing and scurrying about. When you get very large, it's easy to do it from this basic architectural beginning, and much harder to do it from a mammal-like pattern.
The kingdom of the dinosaurs was the longest and most successful reign of any creature on Earth. Our ancestors, the mammals, lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs for all their 150 million years. They survived as tiny, shrew-like creatures living in the nooks and crannies of the dinosaur empire. The real question was not why the mammals did so badly, but why the dinosaurs dominated the Earth. The early extinction killed off the competition. In the struggle for supremacy, dinosaurs had one big advantage: strong, upright legs. The large Tyrannosaurus and Allosaurus combined power with grace for running and supporting a heavy body. The bigger and really heavy dinosaurs made little pretense at poise. Both Centrosaurus and Brachiosaurus used their legs like straight pillars to support the great weight of the body.
Evolution, in a sense, can be seen to be progressing very nicely through the fossil record. And then, bang, everything goes extinct, or a large percentage of everything goes extinct. The timetable is then reset, in a sense, and then evolution carries on again and progresses and develops. And then it can be reset again by an event, such as a mass extinction. The really intriguing thing is that these mass extinctions, it has been proposed, could be periodic.
Death from outer space is not just science fiction. In March 1989, the Earth came close to another global catastrophe. Not dinosaurs this time, but ourselves.
Now, direct from CBS News, this special report.
Reports of a large asteroid that narrowly missed the Earth in the early hours of the morning have just been confirmed. Dr. Harry Holt, the Arizona-based astronomer who identified the asteroid, said, "We are now out of danger, but it was a very near miss indeed."
How close did it come?
It came about 2 times the distance from the Earth to the Moon.
But that's considered pretty close.
That's very close. If it was much closer, it would be pulled in by the gravitational traction of the Earth itself.
How much damage would that 89 meteorite have done?
A lot. An object of that size, traveling at about 25 kilometers a second, would hit the Earth with a force that was equivalent to about 10 to 100 times the combined US and Soviet nuclear arsenal. So it would be a very, very big impact.
That the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago is not in doubt. What is in doubt is why. Just what killed them is today's hottest debate among dinosaur detectives, and there are many theories. Did the climate change? Were they too slow to adapt to evolution? Or, most intriguing of all, did something happen out there in space? Something so cataclysmic that it extinguished the dinosaurs, as it were, in a flash.
The basic idea is that there was a 10-kilometer body of rock that hit the Earth at about 25 kilometers a second. That would yield about 100 million megatons of TNT worth of energy upon impact. And that's 10,000 times the combined US and Soviet nuclear arsenal. So the near hit we almost had would be minuscule by comparison.
Dinosaur detectives are in no doubt that an asteroid hit the Earth 65 million years ago. The question is, was it so catastrophic that it ended the dinosaurs at a stroke? Or was the impact just the last straw, a final blow on top of other changes in climate and environment that already had weakened and reduced the dinosaur empire? So far, the evidence is still being assessed, the verdict unclear.
We're here in the beautiful Badlands of eastern Montana, and in this area we have some remarkable rocks that preserve some real evidence for a detective story. One theory is that the dinosaurs died very gradually as a result of changing environments. And in this theory, during 5-10 million years, the environments changed so much that the dinosaurs could not keep pace, and they died out very slowly. Fewer and fewer kinds of dinosaurs were present. In this theory, as we climb from the bottom of these rocks up to the boundary layer, we would find fewer and fewer kinds of dinosaurs and fewer numbers of dinosaurs. There's another theory that the dinosaurs died very suddenly, perhaps in only a few years. And this theory holds that at the coal layer, there's a clay that was laid down as a result of the impact of an asteroid. And the cataclysmic events of this asteroid impact caused the very abrupt demise of the dinosaurs.
What I'm exposing here is an ancient coal deposit, as you can see down here along this black layer over here, and coming in the center of this coal deposit is this very distinctive white clay layer.
This white clay layer contains, we believe, the remains of material that came from extraterrestrial sources, iridium and shot quartz. And these materials are thought to have come from a source that is not on Earth, but rather from the impact of an asteroid with the Earth. And so what we think is, because we never find dinosaurs higher than this level of clay, but we find dinosaurs all the way to this layer of clay in time, what we believe is that this layer of clay has something to do with the demise of the dinosaurs.
Dinosaur detectives had, by 1980, collected a mass of clues that pointed to a catastrophe from outer space. What was missing was the final proof. Then, 10 years ago, Walter Alvarez claimed he had found the evidence that clinched the debate.
Alvarez didn't introduce the first extraterrestrial hypothesis. There have always been extraterrestrial hypotheses, but in the past, they were in this curious scientific limbo. That is, they were perfectly plausible, but there was no evidence for them. What good is a plausible theory for which there's no recorded evidence? The importance of Alvarez is not that he has a meteorite or an asteroid or a cometary scenario rather than a supernova scenario. It's that he found this iridium level and for the first time gave us something we could test scientifically for catastrophic mass extinction.
Walter Alvarez has found a layer of clay in the rock record that is saturated with iridium. It should not be there. Iridium in that concentration, he claims, could only have come from outer space. Here, he says, is the final proof why dinosaurs died out. Their world was extinguished by a calamity, immediate and devastating.
Well, what it tells us is that the killer was a large rock falling from the sky, a very large rock, something maybe 5 miles in diameter, something like that, falling at a very great speed, landing on the Earth and causing a variety of really terrible environmental disturbances, the result of which was that dinosaurs and many different kinds of shelled animals, plants, microscopic animals and plants in the ocean perished. The iridium was the first evidence we found that the Earth was struck by a large object, comet or asteroid 65 million years ago. But in the 10 years since that have followed, a great deal of confirming evidence has been found of various kinds. For example, the same clay layer that contains the iridium also is full of little tiny drops of rock matter that were originally little droplets of melted rock, melted by the heat of the impact and then dispersed around the world, and they have fallen to Earth after the impact. We find those all over the world. Lots more lines of evidence, various kinds of technical things, all confirming the conclusion that a large object struck the Earth at exactly the time the dinosaurs died out.
The sudden impact theory has not convinced all dinosaur detectives. The clues in the rock record are, for some, still too uncertain to close the file on the death of the dinosaurs.
Is there evidence to connect the iridium with the disappearance of the dinosaurs? And I am not convinced. Now, the scenario suggests that on a Tuesday afternoon, the sun was shining and the dinosaurs were just as happy as can be, and by Wednesday morning, the plain was dotted with these green lumps of putrefying flesh, and the mammals were scurrying around enjoying their prosperity. But the problem is the fossil record cannot distinguish between an event which happened between a Tuesday night and a Wednesday morning and an event which took 10,000 years to occur. And there's a world of difference between these things.
Sudden death from an asteroid, or were dinosaurs already on their way out? After 150 million years of their reign, the climate already was changing, favoring our ancestors, the mammals. Some think the scales already had been tipped against the dinosaurs before the meteorite struck.
In these boxes now are the clues as to who's still around, who's not, who's in the local economy, who's not. These are our clues. This is where we make our census count. This is what determines who is present, who is not, who is expanding, who is going extinct. What we have found now is that there is a decline in dinosaur populations that begins well in advance of the asteroid impact layer. The mammals, at the same time as the dinosaurs decline, the mammals increase. Neither of these observations are consistent with a sudden extinction event.
Whatever the cause, the extinction 65 million years ago left a void. With the end of the dinosaurs came a new opportunity. Out of the hole left by the Holocaust came the little mammals.
If you want to argue is plausible that mammals got through and dinosaurs didn't because mammals were small and smallness conveys advantages. They weren't small because they knew a mass extinction was coming. Presumably they were small for negative reasons because dinosaurs dominated the environments of large-bodied creatures.
And what about the large reptiles that are still around today? How did they survive this mass extinction?
We often wonder why we have such nice tortoises these days, which are still here, are big reptiles. What happened to the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs may have had a problem with sex. A problem with sex in the sense that they probably had temperature-dependent sex determination, like modern reptiles. Most modern reptiles, the temperature of the egg determines the sex of the hatchling. A warm turtle egg gives a female turtle. A cold turtle egg gives a male turtle. This tortoise, it's a male. It came from a cold egg. In the case of lizards, a warm egg makes a male. So now if you could picture dinosaurs migrating away from the ocean side or migrating up to the highlands to lay their eggs in colonies, the climate getting colder and more seasonal, the dinosaurs would have perhaps produced all males in a cold climate. All males would lead to extinction of dinosaurs.
The sex of dinosaur offspring was determined not by the chromosomes of the parents, but by the temperature of the eggs in the nest. And if the eggs were cooling, it is possible that the sex ratios of the offspring were shifting from a 50% male-female ratio to a 75-25 to a 90-10. That may have entirely upset the population structure of dinosaurs. And the last dinosaurs on Earth may have been disappointed males.
Well, turtles and alligators and crocodiles live near water. And if you live near the water, a large lake or an ocean, or if you live near a big river, the climate is more moderated by the water. So a moderated climate with moderate temperatures for the eggs allowed them to survive.
Too many clues may in the end point in too many directions. We may never know for certain what caused the death of the dinosaurs, but one conclusion has been agreed by all detectives, that Earth's history has been punctuated by great extinctions since the beginning.
We don't know how regular mass extinction is, but we certainly know that there have been many of them and that several have been larger than the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. We focus on the one that wiped out the dinosaurs for two reasons. First, we have this enormous parochial interest in it because dinosaurs died and mammals survived, and that's why we're here. Secondly, it's the most recent of the major mass extinctions, and therefore the evidence is better.
Extinction and evolution, which brings us back to Archaeopteryx and its feather, where our story began. All dinosaur detectives agree that in looking at the clues, especially whether dinosaurs survive as birds, requires a great deal of imagination. We try to visualize the world of 200 million years ago, how the dinosaurs lived and how they might have died out. But if we, as it were, imagine forward, fantasize millions of years from now, is it possible, is it just possible, that the most successful species ever might, as we say, stage a comeback?
Stand by, studio. Coming to record. Stand by, Walter on the floor. VT, let's get it together, please. Stand by, studio. Stand by, Walter.
Counting in 10, 9, 8, 7, VTRB, Q-tape.
Coming to camera 4 first.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Take 4 and Q Walter.
Good evening and welcome to Dinosaur TV. and the final episode of our history of life on planet Earth. Even after investigating dinosaur extinction, those clever humans were unable to foresee their own downfall. Their pollution led to uncontrollable global warming, and in the panic, humans fought humans, producing a nuclear holocaust. Few survived, just those lucky feathered dinosaurs, our ancestors, who migrated to the safety of the polar regions. Over time, we recolonized the land and lost our feathers. Dinosaurs were back in control at last.
Fantasy, of course. We humans are still here. We're still in control. But curiously, people everywhere are becoming uneasy. For the more that we appear to master first the Earth and now space, the more fragile our planet becomes. Ours is but a short-lived conquest of this Earth, and while we loftily investigate the dinosaur empire and its fall, perhaps there is revealed in its long, long history an humble truth that our existence is but a flicker, a blip in the history of life on Earth. Whether we rival the magnificent record of the dinosaurs, what only time will tell. But for now, that's the way it is.